Hi, everyone. I'm Anik Benoon,
And I'm Marissa Moschel.
and we're the presidents of the Law Chapter of the Georgetown Entertainment and Media Alliance, also known as GEMA Law, and we're really excited to welcome you today to our 10th annual Sports and Entertainment Law Symposium. A little bit about GEMA Law. We were founded in 2007 to bring this type of programming to the Georgetown Law campus, and we've been doing so ever since.
So today's program consists of about 4 panels, which are the founders, the innovators, the game changers, and we are also thrilled to be presenting our GEMA Law Alumni Achievement Award to Daryl Miller, who is the chair of the Entertainment Law Department and managing partner of Fox Rothschild Los Angeles.
So during each panel, feel free to tweet questions to our Twitter handle. It's at GEMA, GEMA __ law. And the moderators for the panel will be periodically checking our Twitter account and taking your questions. So before we introduce our incredible founders panel, we are excited to welcome to the stage Dean Traynor to share some opening remarks with you. Thank you.
Well, thanks very much, Anik and Marissa, and thank you all for being here. This is really this is an extraordinary moment. Today we're celebrating the 10th anniversary of GEMA Law, and I don't know of any other student group that has really had such an influence on the path of the school, and it's remarkable. I was talking to Raquel Braun a couple of weeks ago about the history of GEMA Law. And, over a course of 10 years, this is an organization that has really built on a couple of things. One is, we've had over the years really an extraordinary group of alumni who've gone into the entertainment and sports field. And it built on that base. And then, there's just an ongoing interest among our students in these fields, in entertainment, in sports, in intellectual property. It's really, when I went to law school, none of these things had been developed. But there was no interest in this. And now there's an amazing interest among the students. And so GEMA Law has 300 members. So it's really right at the top in terms of student interest and giving students opportunity to engage with people who are really the movers and shakers in the field. And it's also driving our curriculum. We now are offering ever more courses in sports and entertainment law, and you're going to see more in the years ahead. And it's responsive to both. That's where the jobs are, but that's also where the student interest is. So, as you're here 10 years into the history of GEMA Law, it's a privilege to thank the organization and to thank we're going to be hearing from the first panel, the people who made it possible. And I also just want to acknowledge all of our alumni for coming back and for their involvement in the law school, in helping the students, in teaching courses, in mentoring, and of course in hiring. You make such a difference. And I want to have a particular shout out to Albert De Castillo, who's joining us, round of applause for Albert. Albert will be shortly receiving the university's major Alumni Achievement Award, the John Carroll Award. And it's very fitting that, he's an example of an alum who really looks out and mentors and helps students and carries on to the next generation because Raquel is his daughter. And that's the kind of tie and community that we're so proud of. So this is an amazing program. And so I'm going to turn it over to Daniel Worley, Georgetown Law, class of 2009, is the moderator of the first panel. The founders, a conversation with the founders of GEMA Law about the role of in-house counsel. A few words about Daniel. Daniel is the managing editor of the sports law blog, thewhitebronco.net. He spent the...
.com.
.net. Oh, no, really? Oh,
Even out.
It's okay.
yes.
Upgrade.
That will take you nowhere, except maybe an O.J. Simpson live feed in prison, which you don't want to go to.
It might be interesting to pursue it. Daniel spent the last 6+ years working at 2 AM Law 100 firms, including most recently practicing in Foley and Lardner's top-rated sports practice group. He has experience working with professional teams, leagues, universities, and athletes on a wider range of legal issues with a primary focus on complex civil litigation. He's now a sports law contributor for Sports Illustrated's The Cauldron, as well as a freelance sports attorney and sports industry consultant. So please welcome Daniel and your first panel.
Thank you, Dean Trainer, and thank you, everyone, for showing up this early and having us here. We're excited to get going, and they asked me to allow our panelists to introduce themselves, so I'm going to toss it right over to my former classmate, Claire.
Dan and I had comm law together. Ironically, I now am in the comm law field, and he can tell you I was not a very good student. I work at Raycom Media now, which owns and operates 63 television stations all over the country, from Hawaii to Richmond to Boise, all over the country. I graduated in 2009, which was when the economy tanked, so my offer at Proskauer Rose was put off for a year. They gave me $60,000 to not work there for a year, and in that time, I took the money, which was great, and worked at NPR for a semester, and then worked at Albritton Communications, which owned 7 ABC affiliates, as well as Politico. And 2 years ago, they sold their stations, and that's when I moved to Raycom. So I'm thrilled to be back.
I'm Raquel Braun, class of 2010. After graduating from the Law Center, I went to Fox Sports out in LA, where I work primarily on our soccer production. You might have heard it's in Russia next year, so a lot of work in Russia. We can talk about that. It's always interesting. And I work on soccer production and Major League Baseball production, as well as a lot of our rights deals for major U.S. properties outside of the U.S.
Hi, I'm Daniel Navarro. I'm a 2009 graduate of the Law Center. I took a job with Greenberg Traurig in New York out of law school and transitioned in 2015 to the NBA, where I work on media matters, technology matters, work with our marketing team, kind of across all of our media distribution, but particularly with respect to local rights for teams and the RSNs that they deal with.
Cool. Well, we are called the Founders, so there's a story behind that. I think we were the class, and I wasn't involved, so I'm not going to take any of this thunder, but we were the class that started GEMA Law, and I'm going to throw it to Raquel to explain that story, as she was really the driving force behind it.
So I'm really curious to hear their stories about how it started. But
We met Raquel. That was it.
So I remember when I came to Georgetown that, there was maybe every other year a sports law class. Sometimes there's an entertainment law class, and that was about it. And when I was looking at law schools, I had this option: do I go to schools that had sports law institutes and sports law programs, or would I go to Georgetown, which didn't have any of that, but as you just heard, I have a Hoya history. And so I decided, you know what, I've done some research. I think, Georgetown seems to have some alumni that really work in this space. I had always wanted to work in sports. And I had heard that it was a school that encouraged students to be entrepreneurial and start things. So I thought, I'm a little type A. I can go to Georgetown, and they may not have any classes or programs in what I want to do, but we'll just start something. So come to campus, and there was a Sports and Entertainment Law Society. So I thought, I'll spend the first semester just listening. Let's see what they're doing. And I remember going to the first meeting, and I had met Dan early on in law school because we had a mutual friend. We went to the same undergrad. So Dan was in there, so I'm like, okay, I know him. I'll sit next to them. And the whole meeting, the students that ran the then current Sports and Entertainment Law Society talked about making a CD. So all these different people played in bands, I guess, in college or in law school, and what they really wanted to do with their time in the Sports and Entertainment Law Society was create a CD of music made by law students, which was great, a great idea. But when I thought I'll go to Georgetown and we'll start something, I thought something that'll get me a job or that I might learn from. So talked to these guys and said, hey, I hear that there's this group called GEMA. And the Georgetown Entertainment Media Alliance had started in 2002, started by an alum, Rich Batista, who's an undergrad alum, very, very involved in the university. And he launched GEMA in LA with the idea of, look, here I am in LA, and there's so many alumni in this space, and they have no idea that they all went to Georgetown, because you get to work and you kind of do your job and you don't ever ask somebody, well, where did you go to school? So they started GEMA in LA. It later branched out to New York, so they had a chapter in New York. And it just so happened that in 2007, they actually launched GEMA in DC. And so I'd heard about it as a 1L and thought, well, why don't we just piggyback on them? They have people, they're, the people running GEMA at the time, who are still very involved, had these amazing jobs in the industry. And I thought, why not leverage that? And we can start something at the Law Center and kind of bring in all these amazing law alums, and kind of do our own thing, and maybe not make a CD of music. And so
I don't think that CD was ever made.
I don't think so.
Tragedy.
So our very first GEMA Law event was the very first GEMA Law Symposium in 2007. So that's my
Actually,
story.
Raquel just told me it's available on YouTube if you want to look at it.
Don't go look it up. Don't Google it.
For small rights fee.
It's interesting. I was thinking about this morning on the train down the founding of GEMA Law. I think Raquel's description is very much on point. I think my perspective, and I'm guessing Ms. Claire shares this with me, was that it founded because Raquel kind of decided that it was going to be founded and did it, which kind of brings up two major things that are important for law students who are trying to break into this industry, which is, I'm guessing, a good bit of the crowd here. The two most important things I think about breaking into the industry, which we'll talk a little bit later, are working really hard and being driven and networking. And so Raquel was willing to work really hard to make sure it was happening and that it was going to happen, and Claire and I were her friends, and we were networking with her. And so we happened to be along for the ride, and I say that both as a joke and in all seriousness, because that's kind of how these things happen. I mean, in order to get something like this done, it takes kind of the vision and the work. I remember Raquel being like, oh, we're going to bring in all these people, and I'm like, yeah, I'm sure you're going to bring the general counsel from the Clippers to Georgetown to sit on your symposium, Raquel, but let me know if you need me to order pizzas for the lunch. and it happened, and not only did it happen, it's kept going both as a tribute to kind of the foundation that was laid and the hard work of the students and the alumni who support it.
And you did a lot more than order pizza. He's selling himself short.
I don't remember that, actually. I don't think you did. I think that's exactly right. Find your Raquel is probably the best advice. And she's among you, I'm certain. But I think it's exactly how it started, is Raquel had the vision.
Well, and Georgetown had this
That's right.
had this great alumni base, and not to diminish, but GEMA was set up, right? The undergraduates had kind of tapped into this, or the B school or whoever it was like, we've got this great thing, and we were a floundering sports and entertainment law society that I don't remember quite just making CDs, but there were no symposiums. It was like a speaker a year. And, be resourceful, tap the resources that you have, the alumni base, both at Georgetown and, if you went to a different undergraduate school. It's amazing what people will do if you pick up the phone, send them an email.
And to sort of piggyback on what Dean Traynor said, and what Raquel said, we were really helped by Georgetown Law also. They gave us the resources we needed. We had the space. We had, the money to buy the pizzas. Danny, thanks. So Georgetown Law played a huge part too.
I agree with that, and Dean Traynor might get mad at me for saying this, but take advantage of the resources that are here. I know when I was in law school, we convinced Georgetown to help us fund a Habitat for Humanity trip to Panama over spring break, and so they helped fly us down to Panama for spring break. And we did great things, but it was also a sweet vacation. So, take advantage of those resources while you're here and as a student. So you may have noticed that the three of the panelists, and we should probably note that Rihanna is unable to make it today. Unfortunately, she had a work thing flare up last night. but her as well. These 4 people all work in-house now, and so if you're a law student, you probably know about on-campus interviews and sort of the path to getting, a first law firm job, but the path to getting an in-house job is much murkier. So you guys want to explain to us how you ended up where you are?
Sure. As I mentioned, I was set up to go to a law firm, Proskauer in New York. Works with the NBA a lot. They have a great sports practice, pretty strong entertainment practice as well. That summer we went to the Tony Awards, the NBA draft. We went to New Orleans for a week. It was a sweet summer. It was right before the economy tanked. And I think I had a part in the economy tanking, actually. They gave us all, there were 70 of us in the class. We each got $60,000 to go away for a year. So I worked at NPR, not far from here. And then, to hear my parents tell it, I was a fully barred attorney who took a law clerkship, essentially, at a company that owned TV stations. And my parents were like, wow, great, you're barely paid. You just graduated from Georgetown, you passed the bar, you're making $15 an hour at Albritton. And I was like, it's okay. For one thing, I had some backing money from Proskauer for that year. But I think that decision changed the trajectory, certainly, of my career, because I got my foot in the door, and I wanted to work in local television. It's what I've kind of always wanted to do. I may be the last person that believes in broadcast. But that clerkship then turned into, when Proskauer called and said, okay, you can come back now, my boss said, don't go back, stay here. We'll make you the assistant general counsel of...
After 1 year.
After 1 year. I was like, really? Have you thought through this? And I had a paid position, and I could stay here in Washington. Didn't go back to New York. Again, my parents kind of chagrined. But I think, in terms of how you get into working in-house, it's how you tell the story of how you want to be there. So, yes, I'll work for $15 an hour. Yes, when I was in college, I worked for $0 an hour for NBC News. You need to prove that you want to be there, that you know the business, and that you're going to be an asset to them. And if you have to do it at $15 an hour, it sucks. But that was my story of how I got in-house.
And now your parents
Now my parents
are very happy.
They're pretty happy.
I asked that question because my story is actually very similar. And I think generally what you'll hear is we all have very different stories, though, and you'll hear throughout the day that to go and work in-house, there really isn't one specific way to do it. And so when I came to the law center, I was obviously a year behind them, and so the market crashed and law firm classes went from this big to this big. And for me, instead of freaking out and thinking, oh my gosh, I thought I was going to work at a big firm and that's what I want to do, I thought, yes, this is my chance. Because I grew up in a family where it was the traditional path was what I was used to. That's what I grew up seeing. And I just knew I wanted to work in sports. I'd worked in sports before coming to law school for a year. And I knew that was kind of the direction I wanted to go in. And so I thought, this is my opportunity because this great economy has given me an excuse to do something different. And so that's also a big part of kind of what got us going at GEMA Law, too, is how do we make ourselves available to be able to network and meet people. So I interned. That was my thing. So I interned every semester of law school, save for my first year. And so I interned a lot, and it happened that my second summer I interned at Fox Sports. And following graduation, I didn't have a job, and so I was working for a judge here in DC, and I got a phone call. And it was the Monday after I got engaged, so I just got engaged. I'm like, okay, I'll be in DC now. And then I get this phone call, and it was from my old boss in LA at Fox. We had kept in touch. Usually I was just emailing him to trash talk about college football. And he calls me and he said, hey, how do you feel about moving to LA? Well, what do you mean? And he goes, well, because we have an opportunity, and we want you to take it, but there's a catch. And the catch was it was a 6-month contract. So they had a woman who was going on maternity leave, and oftentimes what I've seen in-house and definitely at Fox, they look to former interns or somebody that's been there and kind of can jump right in and at least help support while somebody's out. And so he offered me the opportunity to go back, but it was a very finite period of time. And so it's, kind of like Claire with do I take the gamble and take the little risk and take the $15 an hour? I did the same thing. And I thought, hey, fiance, we can do long distance for 6 months. And luckily he up and moved with me. But now I was taking 2 people to LA and hoping, fingers crossed, this works out. But I went there and I busted my butt. And I didn't make as much money as you think you're going to make when you graduate from Georgetown Law, but worked really, really, really hard and did everything I could do to do a good job. And at the same time, I was networking because just in case nothing came of it after 6 months, I had to be prepared. But that 6 months turned into an extension for 2 months, and it turned into being there 6 years later. So it was a lot of just taking a risk, a smart risk, but a risk that I knew that I really thought I could turn into something real. Having those conversations with my dad, are you sure this is what you want to do? And then having the conversation with my dad a year later when I'm driving home from work, sitting in lovely LA traffic, and him saying, you were right, you knew what you were doing, and kind of getting that affirmation afterwards that those risks really do pay off if you're smart about it, and like Dan said, you work really hard.
So my path was, I guess, what some would consider more traditional. But I summered at a law firm as a 2L and then went and accepted my offer at Greenberg Traurig and worked there for 5 or 6 years. And during that, I always knew that I wanted to be in sports. I was maybe a little bit more risk averse than some of my friends up here. And so I would say in that 5 or 6 years, I probably applied to 100 jobs in sports and entertainment. And like that, I've looked recently, like I opened up my folders and it's like cover letters, and like it is a huge folder of cover letters that I sent out because I knew I wanted to be there and I was determined to find a job. And I'm talking like actually putting together good cover letters, not just like find, replace the name. Like I was like tailoring them, really trying to get these jobs. I had some interviews. I didn't hear from a ton of people, but I was just relentless, frankly, and I ended up getting a job at the NBA. I interviewed for a job at the NBA 4 years ago that I didn't get, but apparently I impressed my current boss enough that she was like, I don't think you're the right fit for this role, but 2 years later when they posted a position, and I, of course, applied again, they called me back, and I was able to get the job. As far as advice, I think there's a lot of different paths that you can go in order to kind of break in and to get in-house, and I think any of them work. I think working for free or as an internship, if you can do it, is great. I think a lot of people can't. It's just not practical for them. But if not, just 1, be relentless, and 2, always be making sure that you're putting stuff on your resume that is going to contribute to something that you can sell to a sports media, whatever the job is that you want to do. Find a way to get experience that you can sell. For me, I was at Greenberg Traurig, and they kind of originally, when the market did its thing, they were like, hey, we want you to work on big mortgage-backed securities litigation. And I was, at that time, very happy to have a job, and so did it. And basically just kind of continuously told them, as I was doing really good work and making them a lot of money, as a good associate should, that I wanted to do intellectual property and technology work. And after a year of being there, they liked my work and they let me transition into that group. And in my mind, I thought intellectual property and technology are things that I'm going to be able to sell to a media company as a value add in a way that some other law firm candidates may not be able to do. A lot of people are doing traditional corporate work, which is great. So a lot of people are doing litigation, but I thought maybe the technology piece is something that's kind of new. It wasn't something I was super interested in coming out of law school. I wasn't really a technology person from a legal perspective. I'm a user, a consumer of technology. But I learned a lot about it in my 4 years at the law firm, and I was able to spin that when I began talking to the NBA to say, look, I've got experience, on a bunch of different things that can help you, but here's a way I'm going to differentiate myself. I can be your technology lawyer, and I handle a lot of the technology work that we do now in a way that, I think is a value add for the organization. The person who is handling it before me has been with the NBA for a long time, and technology's changed a lot in the last 20 years in a way that you may or may not be exposed to when you're in-house. Maybe you can have a little bit more exposure when you're working at a big firm whose kind of clients are in that space. So I think it's, being relentless worked for me, and always finding a way to put stuff on your resume that you're going to be able to sell. And I'm going to kick it back to Dan, but I'm interested to hear your perspective on this question as well. Even as a moderator, since we're short-handed, it sounds like you have a...
Well, I'm not in-house, so I don't have a path in-house, obviously, but my path's kind of different. I don't think anyone in the legal field probably has similar things that I do, but I worked at 2 big law firms, did OCI, went to a firm called Foley & Lardner in Chicago. Similar to what Dan was saying, when I got there, I knew I wanted to work in sports. That's why I lateraled to that firm. They have a very significant sports practice, but it's not like you walk in the door at the firm and they just hand you their best case, right? You have to earn trust. You have to make the right connections within the firm, including, I worked with people in New York and DC and all over the place, and that's its own geographical challenge. And so you have to kind of keep grinding away to get that work until, by the end I was doing almost exclusively sports work. But I made a personal choice to leave the firm. My wife, bless her heart, joined the active duty Army, and she's a psychologist in the Army. So we moved, and at that time I was sort of thinking, what do I do next? And so I always enjoyed writing, so I started this website, thewhitebronco.com, which is a sports legal news site.
And recently recognized as one of the top sports law blogs in the country.
By the ABA.
The ABA, so that's something.
It's real.
Yeah, and so, thank you. So doing that, and then I also have a podcast, and I started teaching arbitration in sports at a law school, and just this month started my own law firm with another colleague. So my path's different, and I think that the point is, if you're passionate about it, there's ways to make it happen. It's not always easy. My first law firm job, I went to a big firm in Chicago. There wasn't opportunities. I worked on my craft for 2.5 years there until an opportunity arose where I could get some sports work. So I just sort of wholeheartedly agree with Dan's advice of just kind of keep grinding away and keep networking and keep being patient, because especially if you come from a great law school like Georgetown, there will be opportunities. It's just sort of making yourself marketable at the right time.
Well, and Claire worked at Proskauer, which, as I'm sure everyone knows, is one of the best sports, has one of the best sports practices in the world.
My office mate is now the senior vice president of the Jaguars. She's 31 years old.
Yeah, I remember being like a 1L, being like, yeah, I'm going to get a job at Proskauer. And then you send them your resume, they're like, that's cute. Like, run along. But don't be discouraged. Like, there are millions of ways to break in a way that's meaningful. And those firms are extremely competitive for reasons. And if you can get those opportunities, they're great and you should take advantage of them. And you don't need to hear advice from me. But for those of you who can't, just be relentless. That's kind of, if you're passionate about it, just be relentless.
So, a story about Proskauer, I thought I was sending my resume in for them to turn it back and say it's cute. And I got an interview with them through OCI. And a year later, I had somehow gotten an offer and got there. And the man who interviewed me saw me in the hallway. And he said, I interviewed you. I'm glad you're here. And I said, oh my God, thank you. And he said, your story, and this is how we started, your story was that you had interned with NBC in Italy when the Pope died, which is true. And he said, well, I later found out that he could recognize anybody he hired by the one story that really stood out to him. And it was never, I really love sports law. I like the Dodgers. Cool. That was not going to be a story that sold him. But it's the story that you can tell in your interview. And it has to start on your resume. It has to be real. But that was how he hired people. I don't know if he's still there. But that's my advice if you're trying to get a job there.
That's true. And a lot of people will ask, and we have a lot of students here, what do I talk about in interviews? And my first 5 years at Fox Sports, I oversaw our internship program. So all of our legal interns, I'd kind of run the hiring process. And one of my biggest pet peeves is when a prospective intern would come in and say, I want to work in sports because I love sports. Or I want to work at Fox because my favorite show on FX is Sons of Anarchy. That's great. Do you know anything about what went into producing a show?
How can you help me? Yeah.
What skill set do you have? And so it's great. Look, don't get me wrong, it is absolutely great to love sports if you want to work in sports, or if maybe you don't love all sports, but you really love baseball. So if you're applying for a job in baseball or a certain sport, it is invaluable to actually know about that sport. But you will go in those places and you'll see a lot of people. I work with people who could care less about sports, but they work in sports, and they work in sports because they're a top-notch drafter, or they're really smart about technology, or they have skill sets that really you could be doing in sports, or you could do in entertainment, or you could do in pharmaceuticals. I mean, you could do it in all these different spaces, because a lot of the skills that you need to be a sports lawyer or an entertainment lawyer, that's just the subject matter we're dealing with, but the skills are skills that apply across the board to different areas. So, and I think it's one of the questions you'll ask us later about things to focus on in school, but that's just something to always keep in mind, that just loving sports or loving TV isn't what's going to get you the job. It's what are you going to be able to bring to the table? What skills do you have that'll make you an asset for wherever you're applying?
Yeah, I think it's a great point, and it reminded me of a story that I had about, I used to organize events in Chicago when I lived there, and we had the Cubs General Counsel come in and speak, and it was like an employment panel for the Sports Lawyers Association, and she came in early, and we were talking to her, and one of the partners from my law firm was on the panel, who was an employment lawyer, and so we're like asking her like sports-related questions, and she just seemed so disinterested. And finally, he started talking about he was representing NPR in a deal, and all of a sudden she just lit up because she loves NPR. It kind of goes to show that all these people in these roles aren't necessarily huge sports fans, right? She was just a really, really good lawyer who got the job because she was a good lawyer first, and the Cubs needed one of those. So I think it's a good takeaway of first focus on being a really, really good lawyer, and then hopefully you can make that work with your passion. So, but I think we should move on to the next question, which is another sort of mystery of in-house, especially for people who haven't done it before. Like, what do you do on a day-to-day basis, Claire?
Well, Rihanna's story is just a really good example of you work in-house and you think, oh, this is going to be such a 9-to-5 lawyer job. It's going to be great. It's not. I mean, it's not at all a 9-to-5 job. And when you're in-house, you're often a member of a team of 2 or 3 or 5. You don't have a huge legal staff. You're small groups of people, and so when something happens and you're on deck, you got to go in. And so, I mean, she had her train ticket, she had her bags at work, she was ready to come down, and something blew up, and she had to stay. And I'm sad because we wanted to see her, and we wanted her to be here, but that's what you have to do. You have to be willing to kind of just drop everything and step up. And especially when, not that we're junior lawyers, I think we're all kind of far enough in our careers to not consider ourselves junior lawyers, but we're not running the show, and so if you're not running the show yet, you have to really be willing to just drop things and go. Because if you want to be there, you kind of have to be willing to do it. That has nothing to do with what my day-to-day is, but it's an example of somebody else's.
Right.
Okay, I'll start. So I think day-to-day life in-house, and you guys tell me if it's different, it's never the same. I mean, I have a bunch of different clients, so I have groups in Europe and in Latin America because I work on our channels in those regions. I have soccer production executives and baseball production executives and all these different groups of people. And those are all what we call our clients, because we don't have external clients. My clients are all internal. And so you have all these different clients. They have a lot of different needs, and you're always on call. So when they need something, sometimes they give you plenty of time to draft something. Sometimes they give you 2 hours or 30 minutes or none of that. They wanted it yesterday. And you're just always kind of on your toes, available to kind of do what's needed for any given day, any given project or event or kind of whatever is kind of in the hopper at that time. It's a lot of just being available and really being able to work quickly and efficiently. But it's a lot of drafting. I think if there's a skill that I use every single day, it's drafting and negotiating. I talk a lot. I talk to sports agents. I talk to talent agents. I talk to leagues. I talk to, not necessarily the NBA, but talk to leagues like the NBA. And it's a lot of it is being able to read deals, understanding leverage points, understanding what your business needs, but what you legally need, and being able to quickly process things like that and have kind of a conversation and a negotiation. So those are, if there's anything I do a lot of, it's talking and drafting, and two things that I think you can learn a lot in law school, especially now, versus when we were all in school.
Yeah, I would echo. I mean, I'm a drafter. That's primarily what I do, which may be a little bit discouraging. You think of like the NBA, like, oh, this guy's going to basketball games all the time. Like, I'm sitting there at a computer just working on 15, 50, 150 page documents all day. Maybe not all day, but Raquel.
I would say that's the one thing we don't have to do because we're not at a law firm.
I had one this summer that was over 100. It was not fun. So it's certainly a lot of drafting. That is certainly the one skill you're not good enough at. Anybody in this room, which includes the most senior partners in the world, you can always become a better drafter. So I think that that's the skill to certainly try to hone in on. It's one that we're always working on. But when I'm not drafting, I'm in meetings with my client groups trying to figure out, how we're going to structure a deal, what deal terms are, what considerations are for a specific deal that they're working on that they're not focused on because they didn't work on another deal that could be related or have terms that could overlap. I mean, a lot in the media world, especially, there's, exclusivity and the different platforms are all very important. And so somebody could be working on a broadcast deal for TV and not realize that we just did an OTT deal that would have a conflicting provision that could be problematic. And
Just give it all to us. Just give it all to the TV guys.
Yeah, well,
Give it to your local affiliate.
I thought you were talking about the lawyer. The business people often, at least at my work, the business people will look to the lawyers and kind of be like, hey, is there any problem in any agreement that the NBA has ever done with what I want to do here? And it's not quite going through every agreement, but you kind of have to be aware of the ecosystem, in the media world of what we're doing and helping to structure deals to make sure that everything is going to work out for how, the deal terms that they've come up with. I also work with our marketing and technology groups, and those are kind of just different pieces, but on marketing, when we're producing spots, marketing the game, or marketing, some of our big tentpole events, making sure we have clearances in place, making sure we have the right music rights and things like that. And then also just reviewing, this is a random task at the NBA that I help with, but reviewing creative that goes into the marketplace that has our intellectual property, whether that's NBA trademarks or images or footage that are being used for promotional purposes. I kind of just review that from an intellectual property standpoint. So that is, we review basically every single creative that goes out into the marketplace, which is hundreds of creative a week.
It's a lot.
It's a lot. Time consuming.
My organization is a little bit different, a little bit smaller. So I'm not so much in charge of one specific area like marketing or like technology. I kind of oversee 20 of our TV stations, which means anything that comes up there, and I mean anything, is my problem. And so that ranges from property, so, the station location, and obviously we are news producers, so there are a lot of First Amendment issues. We have one in Ohio right now. A judge has ordered a document turned over to our news team, and the city won't turn it over. So we are suing for FOIA-related things, which is really interesting. We are sued all the time, so I oversee outside counsel's litigation. We have distribution issues, obviously, so that includes things like I have to become knowledgeable on FAA tower regulations, whether or not the lights are blinking at the right intervals, whether or not the paint colors to FAA standards. But we also obviously have cable and satellite deals, and Danny and I were just talking about how much of your time that can take. Anytime you see a crawl that says, your favorite Fox programming won't be available on Sunday because DirecTV is just the worst. That I'm kind of responsible for that, which is fun. But it's truly, I think you would agree that as outside counsel, you are a fixer. You're often the first person that's called when something goes wrong. We had a plane crash into a tower. Well, that became my problem. It was a terrible, terrible day. We had a homeless guy sue us because he thought we had conspired to steal his dog.
Of course.
As we did, obviously, we were guilty. But it just...
How was that complaint?
It was tough. It was tough. I've also had complaints come to me from jail where they've taped grass into it, like actual grass from arguably the jail yard. Hope it was grass anyway. I don't know. It just, you are the first line of defense for these folks, and it's really interesting and it's different every day. And I certainly do a lot of drafting, a lot of negotiating. But I think that's one of the main reasons we like what we do, because it's different every day, and you're not just a cog in the wheel. You're really good at filing the FCC's EEO reports, and so that's what you do for 3 weeks. I mean, every day's different.
It's true, you're a problem solver. And I think as you progress, in my first few years, and I'm sure it was similar for you guys, the first few years, I probably wasn't that much of a problem solver. I got things to draft.
That was a problem, I think.
You draft and you kind of put your head down and you just do the work, but then as you kind of progress and are given, future sports lawyer, already good at making a ruckus. So like as you kind of progress in your career and you work hard, which I think is something we all keep saying, you get given more responsibility, and then you really do become a problem solver. And when you're in a business, different business people like to latch on to people that get them or understand their needs, or they work well with each other. And so, like Claire said, you are their first phone call. I mean, people will call me sometimes like, I know you don't usually work on this, but who do I talk to? How do I get this fixed? I just need it fixed. Mm-hmm. And that's what you want to become. You want to be that first phone call. And it's a lot of it are skills that you can learn while you're in school and then kind of build on as you start in-house.
So I wanted to ask you guys what your one piece of advice would be to students going into law school. We've already kind of touched on that, but I think one thing that I would like to hear is, we've talked about being relentless and networking as two of the big things that help you break into this industry or into the other industry. But do you have any concrete ways that you network with people, or that you reach out to people, or that you join certain organizations for sports law?
Join GEMA Law.
Other than
actually
GEMA Law,
a member, you should be one.
But I think it's just helpful because I remember being a law student and everyone would say, "Oh, go network," and you're like, "Okay," or who do I network
Where
with?
is this
How?
network?
Yeah.
Yeah. Is it
I was
a
like, I
Facebook?
know Raquel, is that the same? Which
Yeah.
it kind of was at the time.
And I think as a lawyer, you kind of pick up these things as you go. But do you guys have certain tips of things that have worked for you over the years?
Yeah, I mean, aside from a GEMA Law, if you're interested in anything else, technology or other things, if there are other organizations, not just being a member, but being an active member helps, because then when you're getting interviewed and you're asked about it, you're not just like, yeah, I go to events and drink their beer. You're like, I go to events and I help plan them and I help pick the speakers or things like that. That's great, and it's great to do when you're a student. A lot of the big industries, so for example, sports, you have the Sports Lawyers Association, and the Sports Lawyers Association every year does a 2-3-day conference in a different city around the country. Amazing place to go network. I saw Dan there this past year. I was in LA. You go there and you can meet literally every general counsel, all of the main lawyers from all of the teams and the leagues and the networks. Everybody goes to that, and I feel like a lot of the big industries have some sort of event like that. And it's just easy networking. And you have to have confidence. That's a nicer way to say it. Grow the confidence to be able to go and talk to somebody. And I think one thing I tell a lot of our interns is to be able to keep in touch. Don't just reach out, ask a question, and kind of be selfish about it. A lot of it's about building relationships. I think part of why I got that call from Fox was because after I interned, I wasn't just harassing him saying, hey, can you hire me? Hey, I'm graduating. Can I get a job? I didn't ever ask that question. I would say, hey, USC football's awful. Go Gators. And we would email about stuff like that, and we would joke about it. I did at one point when I was coming to the end of my 3L year, I said, hey, would love some advice. What are your thoughts? And we kind of would email and have some conversations. But we kept a relationship going, and it was real, and it wasn't just me being selfish and saying, hey, I want you to help me. It was wanting to actually have a relationship with somebody. And I think when you network, I think sometimes for alums or somebody that is the person that you're asking questions to, they sometimes feel like, oh, they just want something from me, or they're just gonna, you want to kind of really worry about kind of the relationship and getting to know somebody, and I don't know.
I think, there are groups and organizations. In addition, I think the Association of Corporate Counsel has a sports and entertainment kind of division. They host a lot of events. And I think publications like SBJ, Sports Business Journal, I don't know how many events they have, but they're organizations that have events. And then also, Teamwork Online is a good one for sports. I see that they're doing a lot of events these days, and I sent a lot of cold emails, like guessing people's email addresses and being like, I bet it's first name, last name, and like, oh, that returned. I'm gonna send it.
You put them on the BCCs.
You taught me
You can
this.
send it. I think I actually taught a whole
These are
thing
real tips
here.
right here.
real.
Yeah.
No, I actually had a PowerPoint presentation that I did after I graduated for GEMA Law.
Relentless.
She
I
never
mean,
stops,
relentless.
guys.
But you figured it out because you go to the websites. I mean, if you really want to work in sports or you really want to work in whatever industry, we didn't have LinkedIn. Really, it was just coming out, so we didn't have LinkedIn. So you would go to the team websites and it would list their general counsel. So you would kind of guess it's at marlins.com, at wizards.com, whatever, and then you would just guess first name dot last name, first initial last name. You just guess. You put it all in the BCCs. And hopefully
That's the
one
trick.
hits.
That's the trick.
And that's how you do it. You just
Some practitioners in the crowd are like, why are you doing that?
sorry.
No, I mean,
But you do that and it shows, I mean, you have to put in the effort. You have to make sure it's a well-written email. Don't call me Disney, I work at Fox. That happens, so you have to pay attention.
But generally, if you've got a connection of some kind, Georgetown, undergrad, whatever it is, and people like to talk about themselves is really the moral of the story. So if you email them, say, your job is so interesting. Can we get coffee? Can you tell me about it? I'm like, God, this kid thinks I'm cool. Like, I'll get coffee with him. Cool. Like, people, you want to help.
I do think it's also helpful to kind of try to pose something of a concrete question. I mean, I think making a connection and setting it up, coffee might be a little bit extreme. I'm not meeting strangers for coffee, but Claire, you do.
I have met strangers
have.
for coffee.
Yeah.
Do it all the time, yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, I think if you can come up with a question, look, whatever works, right? But if you can come up with a question of,
Yeah.
something that you can give them to grasp onto, like a piece of advice or something, I think that helps. And not everyone's going to respond, but if you get 1 out of 10, that's not bad.
A lot of people didn't respond to me.
Yeah, a lot of
And
people.
for the email addresses, I would recommend joining the Sports Lawyers Association. They have a fantastic directory with all the email addresses, so you can kind of skip.
It's worth and there's a student
The
discount.
communications bar has all this too, guys. I just want to get in there for the entertainment folks. And some of them have like scholarships that will send you to the symposiums in LA as a law student. So look into that. I mean, when I met a law student, I was like, oh my gosh, it's amazing that you could come to the National Association of Broadcasters meeting. And she was like, yeah, you know what? I got like a scholarship. I'm here for free. It's like, you're in Las Vegas for free. That's amazing. I mean, talking about finding the resources and using them. And then the only other piece of advice I'd add is read the trade magazines that you're interested in. I'm not sure what's out there for sports, but if I'm hiring or, sometimes job listings show up in those, in broadcasting and cable or in the FCBA newsletter. And it's helpful. So when you read that every day, it's helpful if you know who the major stakeholders are. So if you really want to work in the networks, it's helpful to know that Les Moonves is, the head of CBS, that kind of stuff. That would, I think, is a good piece of advice too.
Absolutely. And it's being able to talk, you want to be able to talk about them, but talk knowledgeably and not in a show-offy type of way. I mean, you don't go into an interview
To name drop, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I've had people come in and they're like, well, I heard that News Corp was having this issue. What do you think about that as a lawyer? And you want to be knowledgeable about the business, especially when you're going in for interviews or informational interviews. But a lot of it's just being smart and, thinking through things and communicating well.
Do we have any Twitter questions? I have to know.
I don't think we have any Twitter questions yet, although I may be
Nobody in
not
here is
doing
No.
Twitter the right way.
We're very good at Twitter.
I am very good at Twitter. But I have more questions, but if people in the audience have questions, we have about 10 minutes left, so raise your hand. Yeah.
Hi, I was wondering how large your departments were, and related questions, who do you use for outside counsel, and how do you manage outside legal costs?
So our department at Fox Sports, I mean, we have different groups within our networks division. So there's a group of attorneys that work on FX matters. There's a group of attorneys that work on sports matters. We have a group of digital lawyers. Within our sports group, I think we have about 15 attorneys, and that's 15 people that handle all of our regional sports networks. So like we have a group of lawyers that will deal with Dan on NBA rights. If you're in Miami for the Miami Heat or in LA for the Clippers. And then you have lawyers like the group I'm in who handle production matters for all of our sports. So you might have heard there's a big football game this weekend, happens to be on Fox. And so you have a whole team of lawyers that are dealing with, Super Bowl issues and, NFL issues and, signing all your talent and everything. So we have groups of people that are focused on different sports or kind of regions. We have international lawyers that deal with our networks around the world. So we have, I'd say in LA, about 14 attorneys. We use a lot of different outside counsel. I mean, it depends on the matter. So we also have legal groups that focus. We have a tax group. We have a litigation team, an employment team. And so depending on the matter, each of them may refer certain matters to outside counsel. And as the business affairs lawyers, we get involved to help with some of the managing of that, but I leave all of that to the litigators, very happily so.
Yeah, I was gonna say on outside legal costs, like, we have somebody at the organization who manages the relationships and like the cost management, and thankfully that is all done before it gets to me. As far as the actual costs, our department, there's 40 plus lawyers at the MBA right now, so it's a big department, and as we use a whole bunch of firms. I don't want to go through and name drop, mostly because I don't know anything close to a comprehensive list. We can chat afterwards if you're particularly interested in certain firms. But it's a business, right? And so everything is a cost and an expense, and law firms bring a ton of value. I think the way I view my job is when I am outsourcing certain aspects to a law firm, I try to make it kind of concrete and take it as far as I can reasonably before turning it over, so that I have a pretty good sense of both how much needs to be done and what a reasonable amount of time to be spending on that. It varies. We don't, as an organization, I think we outsource a decent amount, but we have 40 attorneys, so we do a ton of legal work in-house. I personally have worked on one project in 2 years that has gone to outside counsel. So a lot of our stuff we handle in-house. It has to be pretty big for us to send stuff to a law firm, like the negotiation of a collective bargaining agreement. I'm sure we had quite a few firms helping us on.
That's a big one.
Yeah.
So ours is only 6 attorneys, which is actually pretty big for a broadcast group, to be honest with you. We do have a ton of outside counsel because we have stations all over the country. We have
Getting sued by homeless people.
We're getting sued by homeless people, guys. Right. So we have
Inmates.
It's a lot of inmates. They have a lot of time on their hands to watch the local news and become infatuated with our local news anchors. But we truly need to have a warm body in every city that we operate in. And this recently came up. We had a First Amendment issue in Jonesboro, Arkansas, and we needed somebody to accompany our reporter into court because she was being barred from entry, even though public was allowed into the courtroom. It's a long story. Jonesboro, Arkansas doesn't really have a First Amendment practice, so I had, from a previous job, remembered who we used in Little Rock, and I said, can you get out there? How long is the drive? I don't know. Can you get out there? So truly, we have warm bodies in every city that we operate. But we use, we have a big Washington firm that handles a lot of our FCC work, and it's a lot of outside counsel. But there are only 6 of us, so that's how I justify it.
Other questions? Yep.
With respect to your outside counsel work, do you look for Georgetown alums?
So I don't know how much hiring capability you guys have. I have limited.
I have 0.
Yeah, I have very limited. When I started the job, I got handed a piece of paper that said, if you need the Jonesboro First Amendment attorney, you're out of luck. But if you need the Charlotte property guy, here's who you use. Because that's sort of managed for us. But yeah, I think generally we're always looking for if I see that there's a need, and if that somebody in Jonesboro had been a Georgetown grad, guys, go to Jonesboro. There's the market. I would have hired them.
I certainly, I haven't had a ton of opportunities to be selecting outside counsel, but to the extent that I have, I certainly rely on my network, of which I consider Georgetown to be essential to. To the extent that I'm able to, if I have a project that I'm outsourcing, the first thing I'm trying to do is figure out how to get it done as efficiently and as correctly as possible, and I want to be able to do that with people I trust. And secondarily, if I can help out, a colleague in the industry by directing them business, somebody that I think is really good, that's exactly what I try to do. And I was able to actually, it wasn't a Georgetown person that I sent it to, but it was somebody who had a connection with me from my law firm that I was able to work as a relationship, and which is great because I'm turning it over, I'm helping a colleague who I, one, am friends with, but also know that he's an excellent lawyer and that the work is going to be done and it's going to be done well and on time and efficiently. So the answer is yes, to the extent we're able to.
Yeah. We're still sort of young, so we don't get that kind of young.
Other questions? Okay, I'll ask one more. So you guys are all in similar but different industries and companies. What is like the number one legal issue right now that's either, you're worried about, or that you're working on a lot, or that you think may impact the industry in the next few years?
I can answer that one quick. Mine's a very specific one, but I think it could apply to anybody that's interested in media, but on an international level. So working on the World Cup, which is going to be in Russia next year, and with kind of how technology is moving, and technology is a huge part of our businesses every day, whether it's the sports side, the entertainment side, but then you have this whole layer of privacy laws, and privacy laws in the EU are very different than the US, and then they're very different from what's in Russia. And so it's learning areas of law that I wasn't familiar with, areas of law that we didn't really have classes on when I was in law school, but I know that the law school now offers, because privacy has become one of these really critical parts of my day-to-day business. I deal with a privacy lawyer almost every single day, because protection of privacy and concerns about how you're emailing information that's really not secure. So what if it gets hacked? It happens. And so trying to protect information and protect data, and especially personal information about individuals or people that you're hiring, that's become a part of the job that I never expected. And I feel like I'm learning a lot about quickly, and it's just constantly evolving. And then when you add on the international layer, and international on the level of Russia, it's mind-blowing. So privacy and tax, unfortunately. I have to deal with a lot of tax issues. And so that's the one class I always told people, make sure you take a tax class. It won't be fun, except for my younger brother, who for some reason is a tax lawyer. But understanding even just the basics, so you at least know some of the terminology in tax. We deal with tax issues that I never expected again. But it's helpful to have even just, to know the vocabulary even a little bit is really helpful.
I'll jump in before Danny does, because I suspect we have the same answer. I don't know. But mine would be over-the-top distribution. So how you're watching your TV, how you're watching your content. Are you watching it in silos? Are you going to the NBA channel on your Apple TV? How are you watching your local news? Really important. So I think that has changed. And again, not really something I could prepare for in law school. There is now internet in the law and all sorts of things. Sounds really interesting. I wish I had taken it. But those channels of distribution, how you can geofence to a certain DMA, and does your IP address work, does your MAC address, all that, really interesting, and absolutely where we're moving towards. So,
Yeah, I think I was going to actually hybrid the two answers, which are, the OTT distribution, we're doing a lot of work in virtual reality, which I don't know if it's the next big thing or not, but it's like, I think they all kind of, in data security, I think is a big space. I think technology and software, while it's not super new, I think it's an area where when we were in school, it was not even something that I thought about as like, oh, software or technology law. And I kind of fell into it at the firm that I was at, spending a lot of time in technology. And I think it was something I'm definitely able to utilize, and a space that people who have been practicing for 20 years, a lot of them, maybe they've learned it in the last 10, but it didn't exist when people started out. And I think that there's always, in any case, kind of resistance to things that are totally foreign. And I think some people kind of are just like, I don't want to have anything to do with that. And so I think that that's a way that you can bring value, to a job, it all kind of comes back to technology, data security, OTT distribution, like all of that is software. Not something that I was super interested in, like outside of, when I was in school. But when you start talking about, okay, now we're talking about virtual reality, watching NBA games, all right, maybe that's a little bit more interesting. But as the lawyer, we're the ones drafting the contract. And so what representations and warranties do we need to be worried about? What indemnification should we be worried about with respect to when we're getting involved in that kind of software? So I think that's, maybe it's not like the most cutting edge, but I think it's still kind of pushing the bounds. And
Right.
from a legal aspect, we're still trying to get our hands around it, minds around it.
I think we have one more question, and then we'll call it a day. Go ahead.
Hi. So nowadays, social media broadcasting is a big thing. Facebook Live. How do you guys deal with public performance issues on that?
That's a loaded question. One of the panels today is going to be on Facebook Live, so that's major progress. I mean, I can somewhat address the question and not entirely answer it, but we look at social media as a way to, from our perspective, social media is kind of a way to complement what we offer on our linear networks. So we have broadcast channel, we have cable sports channels, and we look at social media as a great place to host like clips and footage. It's a way to push people to our networks, but for us, a lot of it's just a way to encourage people to come watch it on Fox Sports. And so there's a lot of issues and a lot of questions about how to deal with social media. And, it's one thing if we post something and somebody shares it, but what if somebody films it themselves or they take
Yeah,
the
is your
footage?
question company sanctioned Facebook Live, or is it somebody's at an NBA game in the front row?
And they're periscoping.
Yeah.
I don't know if I have an answer to
I
that
don't.
question.
I don't.
But it is something we think about, not necessarily on the public performance side, but we do, something we think about a lot is how do we approach social media? What are we comfortable with? Because when you talk to a broadcaster, we spend a lot of money on rights to sporting events and sports rights. And so if it's then available for free on a social media platform, that hurts us. And so, but we try to work really hard to find ways to make certain things available to, again, give people some of what they're looking for, but encourage them and push them to come watch it on Fox Sports. And I know, as a league, I actually think last year we had a panel on that talked a lot about OTT and distribution, and I actually think one of Dan's former colleagues at the NBA was talking about Periscope, and look, we don't think people are not going to watch it on live television if they can see part of it on Periscope, but where does it go from here?
Yeah, I think it's hard. As a league, we've been kind of pushing, we've been very much involved in social media. We do stuff on Facebook Live. When our social media team comes to me and asks me the question that you just did, I tell them not to put music in the broadcast or to not broadcast on Facebook Live if there's music involved. Which isn't entirely the best way to handle it, but it's complicated. And so to the extent that we have licenses for our broadcast for television, the events we've otherwise cleared music, maybe it gets a little easier. But again, because of the ecosystem of media distribution we have, our games are, we have exclusivities for so many of our games in various different platforms that we can and can't do. A lot of the content on Facebook Live that we're currently doing is kind of shoulder content, but we're exploring and we're doing more and more events, and it's an interesting issue, and we have another colleague of mine who focuses on some of the music aspects of clearance and public performance licenses.
Well, thank you all for being here, and if you stick around, the Deal Makers panel is next.
Thank you. We're taking our name tags. What? Take our name tags and leave them.
I think they'll come.
Thanks for having us back.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so we're ready to get started with our Deal Makers panel. Officially, the panel is called The Deal Makers, a conversation about the art of making a deal in Hollywood. And so I'm just going to turn it over to our excellent moderator, Jeffrey Schneider, the Executive Vice President of Business and Legal Affairs at National Geographic Partners, and he's going to tell you about himself and introduce the other panelists.
Thanks. I didn't know I was going to tell you about myself. I'm Jeff Schneider. I run legal and business affairs at National Geographic Partners, which is the commercial side of National Geographic. I know some people have been confused since the deal that was done about a year and a half ago, but now there's two different National Geographics. There's a nonprofit, and there's a commercial entity, which is 73% owned by Fox. That's who I work for. There are a number of people in the audience here who work for it as well, came to fill out the crowd today. I come from LA. I've been here a year and a half. I worked my entire career up until coming here in Los Angeles, working for a variety of TV networks and studios. I won't go through them all. It's probably in some, GEMA, materials, so I'll let you look it up. I'm also a professor here at the Law Center, so you can find me that way. But I would rather introduce the people sitting next to me because they're the ones who are going to be doing the talking. So I'll go from my right down. Lisa Williams-Fontroy is SVP of Business and Legal Affairs at Discovery Networks. She oversees all deal and transactional work for Animal Planet and Science Channel, and is probably the senior most lawyer in the DC office. Is that correct?
On the business legal affairs
Yeah,
side.
in business
Yep.
and legal affairs. Next to Lisa is Chris Floyd. He's the chief operating officer and general counsel for Amblin Partners, the film and television company that is chaired by Steven Spielberg, which basically replaced DreamWorks. He oversees international distribution, business and legal affairs, corporate legal, human resources, merchandising, ancillary licensing, and he also cleans the offices after work.
We're an all-service shop.
He helped launch, excuse me, I've been having a cold lately, so. He helped launch Amblin from the former DreamWorks Studios, where he also worked as the general counsel and head of business affairs. Let's see, who's next? Rebecca. Rebecca, excuse me, Rebecca Sanweza.
Sanweza.
I did it beforehand, and I couldn't do it now. Is Senior Vice President, Associate General Counsel for IMG Worldwide, where she oversees legal and business affairs for the company's global entertainment and lifestyle event and media businesses, including IMG Original Content, IMG Models, IMG Fashion, Miss Universe, the Frieze Art Fair, Music and Culinary Festivals, as well as IMG's digital and consulting businesses. And last but certainly not least, Claudine Wilson, who's a senior counsel for legal and business affairs at HBO in New York, where she specializes in advertising, intellectual property, and privacy matters. She mainly services the marketing group at HBO. So welcome our esteemed panel. I'll kick us off with a general question to the panel, which I'm sure is one that people always ask, is you're deal makers now, but how did you get into the business? Anybody?
I'll go. I'm in it because of a Christmas party. I was a litigator out in Los Angeles, and my firm did entertainment litigation, and I was miserable. I was killing myself, as some people do. I was working 2,200 hours a week, a year billable, and it was bad. And I went to a Christmas party and complained and ran into a guy who had a friend who was at Disney and said, hey, a friend of mine is looking for a lawyer, a young lawyer. Why don't you go talk to him? And I did, and then I got my first job at Disney. Took a pay cut to my parents' chagrin, but got in to the entertainment world and then ended up moving around to the different studios and worked up to where I am. So you can network anywhere, even a party.
By the way, that's almost exactly my story, except it was Paramount. So.
I'll jump in. I always had an interest in communications and entertainment law, and was fortunate enough when I was here at Georgetown to intern at the FCC. I did IPR, and then after law school, I joined a boutique law firm that had a really tiny entertainment law practice, and which was unusual for DC. And I think that's something we'll probably talk about a little bit later, but being here in DC was fortuitous for me because Discovery Channel had an opening actually 20 years ago in 1997. And I wasn't looking, but thought it would be a great opportunity. And so when I got the headhunter call, admittedly, I was not ready. I was not prepared with my resume. I was not ready for the questions they were going to ask me. So note number one, be ready. But luckily, I got myself together quickly and was fortunate enough to get in the door kind of early on and have been there since then.
I'll go. I worked in television and film production after college for a number of years and was at the Children's Television Workshop. My show was canceled, and I didn't feel passionate about any of the work I had been doing in television. Didn't want to write or produce, direct, finance. I went to law school. Turned out to be a good idea. I was a litigator for almost 7 years in New York and in San Francisco. I had a very good friend who was in-house at Bertelsmann who told me about a job there after I had decided I wasn't going to, I decided and probably they decided I wasn't going to push for partner. And I retooled as a media lawyer and went from a job at Bertelsmann to a job at Time Inc., where I became the TV lawyer, really on the experience I had before law school and kind of convincing myself and the general counsel that understanding the vocabulary was probably more important than anything else, and I had that. I was at Time Inc. for almost 11 years and recently left to go to IMG, and it was really through personal connections and being recruited from the business side.
I'd say for me, personal connections definitely helped a lot. And I think the first panel talked about networking. And I think a lot of folks think about networking in terms of, oh, I got to go out there and meet a bunch of strangers and they're going to ultimately get me a job. But you really cannot underestimate the power of just networking with the people in this room, the people in your law school. Just having good friends and keeping up with them after I graduated and talking to them about what they were doing is really what got me to where I am now. I started out in DC working at a litigation firm, just trying to do as much IP work as possible and avoid the aviation insurance cases, mostly unsuccessfully. And I did that for a while, and just in, like I said, keeping up with a lot of my friends from law school. One of my friends in particular was working in the advertising marketing space, and that was an unknown practice area when I was at law school. I think Professor Rebecca Tushnet started an ad marketing class here, which is great. But before that, I didn't know anything about it. So it was really helpful talking to some of my friends, figuring out what they were doing, and just working towards that end and trying to get into firms in New York that did advertising marketing, because that's really where the market is. And so that's where I started doing ad marketing in a law firm in New York, and then ultimately, just a couple years ago, moved over to HBO.
You can notice that there's a lot of consistency here about the way that people got jobs, the networking, the pre-job experience in either other media or even in non-entertainment jobs, and the variety that's represented on this panel. That you could end up anywhere. In some ways, it's somewhat random, but definitely, I think that this represents the experiences of people who do it well. I don't know if it necessarily represents everybody, but it represents the people who get the kind of jobs that get called back to be on panels, which is what you probably all want to be, and not somebody who's toiling away as a clerk somewhere or, a paralegal that took that job straight out of law school thinking, well, this will get me into the entertainment industry. Good law firm background, good training, and then knowing people is what eventually will get you there, I think, and I think this panel is evident of that. But it is a deal maker panel, so let's talk about deals a little bit. There comes a moment in everybody's life where you have to make your first deal. You come out of law school, right? You're not making deals in law school. They don't really teach you much about negotiating contracts in law school. They don't even teach you much about writing contracts in law school. So what advice would you guys have for somebody who's starting out in a transactional practice and gets their first deal to negotiate?
I think I'd like to start on that one. I think one of the best things I did here at law school was join the ADR negotiation team. That was invaluable. Reading Getting to Yes, understanding that it wasn't just about arguing, which we're all very good at doing, and winning an argument, but getting to a point where everyone walks away feeling as though they won. That's, to me, a good negotiation. So I think when you're starting out, I learned it was most important for me to kind of sit back and listen, did a lot of listening, hearing out the other side, what exactly is it that they're looking for, kind of stepping back and instead of immediately thinking of a counter argument, thinking about, okay, how can we accommodate that without putting ourselves in a bad position? So I would say listening, for sure, is a good thing to start out doing.
And I would just, if we're going to go that way.
Anyway.
For me, it was really understanding from my business clients what they needed to get out of the deal and what were deal breakers and what were the issues that we could maybe get creative on. I remember when I was first at my job at Bertelsmann, I didn't really know what an advertorial was or what bonus pages were, but I was negotiating a deal in which we were going to provide bonus pages for certain pricing, and that was very dependent upon paid advertising in the magazine. I didn't know that. I didn't know how it worked. And as a result, I started negotiating this deal, and it was a complete disaster. I learned pretty quickly what bonus pages were all about, but it was a lesson for not going into a negotiation before consulting with my clients and really making sure that I had an understanding of what our objectives were. You can be a great negotiator, but you don't need to win every single point, and so it's important to understand what you can trade and what you need to have in any deal so that you can be effective. That would be my advice.
I would agree with that. I think the key to negotiating is asking questions. And so it's listening and asking. You should start off you have to ask questions of your side and your people, what do they want? But I start off every negotiation asking, what is the other side looking for? And see if I can poke and prod and see what's important to them and what's not. And then you have a real sense, because once you have information on both sides, it's much easier to come to an agreement where you both are happy with it at the end of the day. No one gets everything they want, but if you can find the middle ground where you're both kind of happy, then you can move forward. So it's all about asking the right questions.
One thing that's great about this panel is that Chris and I actually have been on other sides of negotiations, so I get to learn his tips. I promise not to use it against you, but I agree with what what everyone has said. I think the other thing, I just want to pick up on understanding the business piece, which is something, admittedly, I did not know and did not understand as well when I went in-house. And part of that was because when I initially went to Discovery, I was in the legal department, which tended to be a little more back office and more transactional and drafting, which was great because surprisingly, I love to draft. It was good, but I think that it's critical to know what your client needs, what they want, what's the end game. And then to Chris's point, when you go into the negotiation, it's also important to know what are the things you can let go, because you cannot have what we call deal fatigue, which is just belaboring issues that really don't matter. And so all of those things, like really understanding the business goals and really knowing where you can let things go, and also being able to say no with a little sugar as opposed to vinegar. There are ways for things to go over to make the deal go a little better.
Right. And you have to realize that these negotiating worlds, they're small worlds. There's a limited number of lawyers in the film group and a limited number of people in the TV group, and you're going to deal with those people over and over and over again. So winning at all costs in the first negotiation is a death knell to your career, because you're going to see those same people and they're going to remember. And so the key is to build a level of trust and a relationship with those guys, and you'll win some and you'll lose some, but in the long run, you'll win more than you lose if you take a moderate attitude from the very beginning.
Yeah, we have
to build on what Chris said, if you get the best deal possible and you really decimate the other side, they're not really going to be that excited about renewing the agreement that might have been terrific for your side. And so if the goal is to really stay in a deal and encourage your business to stay in long-term deals where they can make money, then the deal really needs to be fair, or there's not going to be incentive to stay.
Yeah. Can I just add one thing? I think those strategies are things that you learn over time, too. Mm-hmm. You don't just come out of law school knowing those things. It goes to the point of, if you can ever sit in the room and listen to a negotiation and just be the listener, or sit in the room and hear what the business goals are, what the strategy is, that can inform you so that as you're going along in your career, you can use those things, build up your own cachet of material.
That's a great point. I mean, early in my career when I had interns, I mostly used them just to do simple drafting. But now I realize that it's just important to have them sit in and listen to what we do. if it's about education as much as it is about getting work, and I don't view interns as just work, I view it as an educational opportunity, they should be sitting in those negotiations and the meetings with the clients, because that's really, really interesting, because you learn things about what goes into saying, the positions that you're taking in a deal. You don't realize the context behind them unless you're sitting there with the clients talking through the business issues, and that's something you rarely get as a young lawyer, and certainly not in law school. One piece of advice for beginning, or what I heard about giving deals to beginning deal makers, there was I'll steal from somebody that I heard it from a long time ago. There was a business affairs executive, ran NBC business affairs through the 80s and early 90s, by the name of John Agolia, who's a legend in broadcast television. And he said the scariest thing in the world for him is he gives an assignment for a deal to a new lawyer, and the lawyer goes right back to their office, picks up the phone, and calls the other side. And what he meant was that there are many steps between getting the assignment and calling the other side, and that very few people understand what all those steps are, and that's what these panelists were talking about. All right, let's, should I shoot into some more specific business questions for each of you? Let's stick with Lisa. What are your challenges now, and how are the deals different now in cable television versus, say, 5 years ago? What are the big things that have changed?
Probably the change in media. The ability to take content and the variety of different modes of distribution that we have. And we have a line, I think all of us have a line in our contracts that says all rights, all media, in perpetuity, worldwide, sign away your children's lives. All of that is in there. And it's broad, but still you get questions about how to distribute the content on a mobile device when you weren't doing that 5 years ago. Or how to draft around a person who, and this is very recent for us, draft around a person who is a social media influencer. And what does that mean? And so those things are, what I think about those things are that they're evolving with your business, and it actually keeps you fresh and keeps your work alive. But I think that's the biggest thing. One other thing is production models. Producers are having a harder time with some of their margins and want to keep international rights. And when we, as a global production company, a global network, want to distribute our rights worldwide, it's a challenge when a producer wants to retain those rights because they want to distribute it. So those are two places I think are kind of the biggest areas of contention.
I'll go to Claudine also and ask, your role is a little bit different from the others on the panel in that you support a particular business unit within the company. And I think a lot of people are not very knowledgeable about that area in the audience. So can you tell us a little bit about what kind of deals you do and what it's like to work in the marketing area of a network as big and as well known as HBO?
Sure. So advertising marketing law sounds like a niche practice. I remember when I was just about to jump into it, I was like, this is perfect. I'll just learn this little body of law, be an expert in it, and then I'll be the best. And you quickly realize how broad it is. Data privacy, for example, is huge. You always have to think about the consumers. There's always the consumer protection slant of everything. It colors absolutely everything. You're looking at children's advertising if you happen to direct any ads towards children under the age of 13. You're looking at programmatic ad buys and engaging different technology experts in the marketing space to serve ads in a variety of different mediums. So at HBO, I think a lot of my experience in working on a variety of deals and really getting a diverse legal experience in drafting and negotiating all types of deals really started at the firm. I worked at Frankfurt Kernet in New York. It's a boutique kind of entertainment advertising firm. So I got a lot of experience there. At HBO, we're not an ad-supported network, right? We don't have third-party ads on our site, so that makes things a little bit easier from that front. Really, I just have to worry about the ads that we are putting out there a lot of content clearance, talent deals with social media influencers, which really just means you take really great pictures on Instagram. And I found a way to monetize that. I'm still trying to figure that out. I need a good SLR, and I need to eat better food. So yeah, the deals are very diverse. There's a lot going on, and there's a regulatory component to it as well, so I have to keep up with what's going on at the FTC, what's going on in the self-regulatory space, like the National Advertising Division, false advertising claims. There's just, you name it, we have to think about it. So you could be working on a talent deal one day, or you could be working on an ad buy, media buy, technology-based deal another day. It really does vary, but it keeps things at least really interesting, I think.
And Rebecca, sort of the same question. What deals do you do in live events and live programming that are sort of different than what we can think about in traditional media?
Sure. Well, I'll take the Miss Universe organization for one. So that was a property that had been owned by Donald Trump and NBC, and IMG bought that property about a year and a half ago. And with that, we needed to find a new broadcast partner. So I negotiated the broadcast deal with Fox. That was an interesting experience for a number of reasons. The first being nobody really knew what this program was going to be. It was a new entity for IMG. We were working with our parent company, WME, to think through talent, think through different format, make it much more of a broadcast special as opposed to a pageant competition. And so it was very difficult to get the licensing fees and the kinds of commitment that you would typically want when you're negotiating this. As a result, what we ended up doing, and we entered into this agreement before we had secured Steve Harvey, who was our host. And if any of you were following the news last year, that turned out to be one of the best things. I mean, it was actually the worst thing in the world to happen to me in the first 2 hours, but it turned out to be the best negotiating tool for me for after that, because what we agreed was that we would kind of put a pin in the negotiation after the first year, because Fox and we wanted to show what we could do, and we agreed that we would set a base level licensing fee and that we would revisit breakage, which is what a network is willing to pay over their licensing fee for A-list talent. So when we secured Steve Harvey, we were able to negotiate a little more for his hosting fees. Then flash forward, Las Vegas, December. I usually have an 18-hour rule for Las Vegas. I don't like to be there more than 18 hours. And I certainly don't like to be standing in Planet Hollywood next to the Britney Spears slot machines while I'm trying to work with our producers and broadcast standards people to make sure that we're doing everything we need to do. But as probably most of you know, when Steve Harvey announced the winner back in December 2016, he announced Miss Columbia, who then came out and he crowned her, and lots of fanfare. It was good television. He left the stage, and immediately our judges said, "You crowned the wrong winner." It was Miss Philippines. There were about 3 minutes where, and I could see it in the producers' heads, can we just go with this?
Yes, TV producers.
The answer was no, and we literally, this was probably the most stressful experience I had to date. We were standing there, and we needed to get Steve Harvey back on the stage to crown Miss Philippines while the broadcast was still going. This needed to happen on air. And so we kind of figured it out and figured out what he was going to say, but he really is a master, and he got out there and he just, did his mea culpa, and, horrible things ensued for, again, the first hour. It was like a real shit show. And that is a legal term.
Yes, indeed.
But, again, from that, and because Steve did own it, and because we owned it, and because the right winner was ultimately crowned, and that was the message, and working with our PR and our, all of our team to really drive that message, turned into a very, very nicely paid Super Bowl commercial for Steve Harvey last year. Turned into me, because the ratings for the show kind of went through the roof after that. Turned into a very nice moment for me to be able to negotiate that next 3-year deal, with Fox saying, you have to lock in Steve Harvey, like we need him. So that became, and we already had locked him in, by the way, so that was something I didn't disclose when I was negotiating for the first year. And it was just a nice moment for all of us, so all of us at IMG.
Chris, everyone else on the panel has said something about TV. We all do TV deals in one way or another. You mostly are a film guy, or you've come out of the film world. What differences are there between the film culture and the TV culture, and how does that change the way that you do deals?
I think the film culture is, the numbers are bigger on an individual project, and so it throws off people's perspectives. I think TV has a financial discipline that film has not always had, and so film is trying to get its act together, and so there's a lot of egos and star-driven ideas in the film community that you have to deal with. So there are multiple levels on a film. You have the lawyer who represents them, you have the agent, you have the business manager, you have the personal manager, and you're dealing with all those people at the same time. Where I think in TV, at least I'm finding, it's a little more straightforward. There's still the occasional star, but I think TV is a more contained business atmosphere. And the film side is dealing with the international side of things a lot more now. I think TV's been good for a long time about selling international rights, whereas film, for a long time, you had one studio and they distributed you around the world, and that's what it was. But now a lot of places like Amblin, we realize that we can make money ourselves internationally, and so there's a big focus on that in the film world, and breaking up rights and selling them yourselves.
Let's go back to sort of a general question and something that, based on Rebecca's response on the Miss Universe, I thought maybe we should ask everybody, what's the most unusual deal you've ever worked on? Who wants to think about that and go first? While you guys are thinking, I'll tell you one that I did. Very early in my career, I was still in the legal department, and we made a TV movie in the Philippines about giant killer robots. That isn't the unusual part. When we were leaving, we had this 75-foot robot mock-up that we were going to take down, and the provincial governor asked that we sell it to him so that he could make it into a tourist attraction. And so I did a deal to sell a 75-foot robot to a province in the Philippines, including all sorts of, assumption of liability language. And for all I know, that thing is still there. This was 20-something years ago, but that's mine.
I don't know if I have unusual off the top of my head, but I will tell you, Naked and Afraid is fascinating to me. I think, as we've watched television evolve over the years, another challenge is just keeping up with the ability to compete with the number of choices that are out there. And so I sit in the development meetings. So you can imagine when this comes across the slate, and I'm saying you're going to what? People are going to be naked, and they're going to live in the jungle for 21 days. And so what's kind of exciting about it is that you have this whole level of, talking about social influencers, but different challenges with different shows. So the serious side of that is there's some really intense insurance clearances that we have to go through with that. There's some very intense psychological, medical, and background checks we go through with that. And candidly, as a production lawyer for a show like that, you always worry that someone's going to get their toe bitten off by a snake. And it can happen. And just as Rebecca was saying, there are great things that you see on TV because of that sort of extra, creative content. But there are some very sort of nerve-wracking pieces to that. So, I mean, maybe not unusual, but I am amazed at that show, just, from the inside and even from the outside. And my 9-year-olds want to watch it, and I don't let them.
I worked on a lot of shows at MTV that were like that, and what's amazing to me is how creative lawyers can be at making a show as safe as possible and as low liability as possible, but it's still looking really, really dangerous on TV.
Yeah.
That's all I'll say.
Yeah. The magic of TV and cinema. That's the whole point. I would say just over my career, they've spanned the gamut. All kinds of weird things happen. You just deal with them. I think the weirdest thing I ever had to deal with was we had an actor who had a known drug problem, and we had to negotiate drug tests, how urine versus blood, how often, how many times, to get insurance to have the person covered. So I became a medical expert for a couple of weeks on drug testing. It was something that I had never done before. So
Can I just add to that in the negotiation piece? We had a talent who publicly was known to partake in marijuana regularly, and so in his morals clause, which says no drugs, he fought it. And he publicly talks about it, and so those are one of those things that you have to work around because that's part of who the talent is, but you also know that you need to craft some language that maybe says, well, no drugs on the set, but we're not going to talk about what you do at home. And so those are the things that kind of do come up and make it a little interesting.
Can we guess who both of those people are?
No.
And I will just to keep with the drug theme, when I worked in film production, so this is before law school, I was a PA on a film, and I was also sitting in on movies and trying to learn stuff, and I was with the line producer who was going through the budget. And I was just asking questions, what is each item, what does the best boy do, things like that. But there was a line item in the budget of $50,000, watermelon. And I said, that's like a shit ton of watermelon. What's that all about? And he was like, well, that's kind of a plug. The lead actor in the production had a known coke habit, and they literally budgeted for it.
Wow.
That's my drug.
That I've never seen. I've seen people budget for a sexual harassment settlement in a budget.
In advance?
No, it happened. That's good. It happened between seasons, and so they put it in the next season's budget and hid it as another item. But
smart.
Wow.
It wasn't any of my companies.
No, nor mine.
I don't think I could top that, which is surprising because I work with marketers. I think for me, maybe not unusual, but the toughest to deal with in terms of ad campaigns are always the guerrilla marketing campaigns, which are just kind of the unconventional and always very cheap marketing campaigns that 9 times out of 10 involve some group of people trying to do something illegal or without a permit and trying to paper that and figure out a way to keep them on the right track of the law has been really difficult, but no drug stories.
You're young.
Yeah, there's still time.
You're young. You're young. That's right. So a lot of us started doing pure legal work, then we got into somewhat business affairs type roles, and then in the case of some of us like Chris, and this is his question, you go into management, finance, operations, corporate type functions. What do you think is, for people who are just getting JDs and not MBAs, what do you think is the best preparation to be able to make that sort of a transition in your career from the lawyer to the business person?
I think a lot of it is just absorbing and being a fly on the wall when you're there. You can be a lawyer and you can be a great draftsman and you can transfer those skills anywhere. But if you want to move into management, you have to really understand the substance. So you have to get yourself invited or show up at meetings and be a fly on the wall and hear what's going on and hear when the decisions are made as to what projects are going to be bought for development. And then I would sit in on meetings to determine what pictures were going to be greenlit, they're actually going to be made. And then you find out there's a whole finance component to it that as a lawyer you may not have seen along the way. So you start learning the finance part of things. And I will tell you there's a lot of math that you have to have as a lawyer, no matter what you just do if you're going to be in this. So I read now profit and loss statements where we will take a movie, a project that we've got, and we'll estimate if we have this actor and it's cost this amount of budget, and if it does this amount of box office, how much money will we make? And we can determine whether we think the movie's going to make that much money to justify making it. And those are all different groups that come together. So it's about absorbing all that information. And so you have that wealth of knowledge. And then it's about people skills. Management is people skills. It's about making sure that all those skills you learned as a negotiator, or those interpersonal skills, you're translating those to the people that end up working for you and that work in other departments. Because in my job, I think I was servicing a bunch of different areas and built those relationships so that now in management, those relationships remain and they trust your knowledge and your efforts to help them along the way, and they'll respect you. So it's information and relationships, kind of work together.
Anybody want to add to that?
I think absolutely it's the relationships. I think there's also something about if you really, as a junior lawyer, are interested in an industry or a company, it's figuring out, all of the, kind of the structure of the company, what they do, what the issues are, and then it's being authentic to who you are too, and being able to deliver the goods. And a lot of lawyers that I hire are not lawyers that have worked in entertainment. And the founders panel, people were talking about like, oh, I love sports, oh, I love entertainment, oh, I watch a lot of TV. If somebody doesn't like to watch a lot of TV, they shouldn't be working for me, because that's all I want to talk about. But I'm looking for lawyers that really have legal skills honed so that they can help me issue spot and contribute to, what is not really learnable in law school, and that is, just how to deal with crazy businesses, crazy people, everything on warp speed. So, it's really just finding that connection.
I'm sorry, I was thinking that every company has a personality too. So I think each of our places have their own distinct personality, and I've worked at 4 or 5 studios over my career, and so everyone was very different. Some were very corporate and very buttoned down and very organized, and some more looser and more free-flowing. And so you have to match your personality with your company. And if you're a buttoned down, by the book person, you would not function well at Amblin. Whereas if you're a complete freewheeler and you don't pay attention to the rules, you would die at Disney. So you have to match your personality with your company as well, and notice that as you're growing.
I'd add to that, having been at a company for 20 years, that company cultures can change even while you're still there. And that's something that requires being adaptable. And I think that's one of the places where, when new regimes come in, either really high level or low, at sort of the day-to-day place, that point is well taken, because new regimes bring in different ways of thinking about things, innovating, and you have to adapt to it, and you have to roll with it. And if you don't, you'll roll out the door. And, and that can happen. But recognize that even within companies, things can change.
Yeah, and I'd add about, this business learning that even if your goal is simply to be the best deal maker you can, and you never are interested in corporate operations or business or managing people, I still think it's really important to both learn the nuts and bolts of your business, because you can't be a good deal maker unless you know how your business operates and how every person and job in the supply chain functions, and also the cultural issues that they mentioned up here, which is to understand how your company ticks, who's who, what their tolerance is for risk, what their culture is, because there are a lot of mismatches. And I tell people all the time, I think there's a tendency when, from a student point of view or an early, legal career point of view, that, I just want to get that job in the entertainment industry, and then everything will be fine. And then you realize that there are a lot of places in the entertainment industry, just like in any business, that you might not like, and they might not like you, and you might not function together. And so I tell people all the time, don't be afraid to change or to reject a job because it's not you. You're going to get another one. You're going to get another opportunity if you're smart, you're a good lawyer. You don't have to take that crappy job at the first place that offers it to you. But people think, I've got to get in the business. It's actually probably better to do another year, another 2 years in whatever function you're doing at your law firm than it is to take a bad job in the entertainment industry.
Can I also add, when you're in wherever you are, whether it be the law firm or in-house, it's always great to be able to have that mentor or sponsor or guide so that you can go ask the questions to privately when you're out of the room, as Rec was saying, taking notes on something and not knowing what it was. And that'll be the person who will bring you into the room, knowing that you're just going to sit and listen. But if you can identify that person, if there's not a formal mentoring program or a formal matching program for projects, it would always be helpful to have that person that's a few rungs above you who is willing to take you under their wing and let you ask the crazy questions and sit in on the meetings.
Right. And then the key is to return that favor. So I think everyone here has probably had great mentors. I know I did. And so when I was given the chance to be in a position where I had some authority, I made sure that I had people sitting in those offices, in those meetings, because it's important. It strengthens your position in the company as well. If you're helping other people, then they trust you, and it makes everybody stronger. So it's a give and take.
One thing I actually used to do, and I think that's really good advice, is I used to ask partners at the law firm if I could just sit and watch them. And we've been talking about listening and making sure you are shadowing people. And I would try to shadow a bunch of different people to see different negotiation strategies. Not everyone is the same. You've got like the bulldog, and you've got, the kill them with kindness kind of approach. And so that's really helpful to be able to do that. And then to a point you made, Jeff, about making sure you understand the culture and also the products, the products and services. When a marketer comes to me and says, we're engaging this agency, they're going to do something really cool on this new social media site, and I don't know what it is. I download it, I get active in it, I get my friends to join it. You have to really kind of like engulf yourself in the entire company and what the marketing folks are doing, so you can have an educated conversation with them at their level about the products that they're focused on.
Let's talk a little bit more about deal issues and deal mechanics. Chris, I have a question. No, it's actually not Chris. It's a Rebecca question. I'm looking at the wrong part. See? Switch up. Keep it live. IMG obviously represents a lot of talent, but they're also a very entrepreneurial company that has all of these businesses. Is there ever a conflict between your duties as talent representatives and your desires as a business to expand your product and your distribution and to make money, sometimes off your talent?
Yes, of course. The structure is almost an inherent conflict. WME is a talent agency. IMG is a representation management company that also owns lots of different events and properties. And so there are sports personalities that are being managed, and anyone who wants a quick course in agency versus management, managers aren't regulated and they don't need to stick to a 10% commission. Agents, on the other hand, are booking jobs for their clients and they're regulated, and there is typically a cap in most states of 10%. I would say at my company, the biggest mantra is the fiduciary duty to our talent, and so that reigns supreme, which means if I am working on an original content deal with WME represented talent, there's really an arm's length transaction that's going on. There is no ability for me to tell my producers that we can get a break on talent. Oh, Matt Damon will do it for free, it's no problem.
Right.
That doesn't happen, and in fact, what more often happens as IMG is building its street cred as a producer is it's going to pay top shelf and then some to get the talent to come to our properties. So a lot of what we do, we disclose to make clear the relationship, and then talent is represented completely separately from our business properties. And talent also has their outside lawyers that are always involved in their deals. And so it truly, it's something that we think about quite seriously. And we wouldn't be where we are without the talent, so that has to come first.
Claudine, what you're representing the marketing group at HBO. I'm sure you have friends who represent programming. What does your life like as opposed to theirs? How do you view the business affairs people who support programming and what they do, and how is that different than from what you do?
It's pretty different. Some of the issues are the same, of course, but on the marketing legal side, we are business affairs for our client. There's no real liaison between legal and the business. So we're involved really every step of the way, from the moment that a show is greenlit on HBO till premiere, and then even after premiere, we're involved with the client on every single deal, every single marketing campaign, from the ones that were concepted at the beginning all the way to the ones that kind of popped up because something happened in popular culture. We want to kind of leverage that. So I think one thing that is very true to my practice, I'm not sure as much on the programming side, you folks can answer to that for sure, is I'm on the phone every single day with my marketing clients, talking through things that they want to do and helping counsel them and figuring out, okay, does this make sense? What are you actually trying to achieve? Does this make sense? Do you want to work with this vendor or that vendor? And it really is an ongoing relationship that is, it's also important for negotiations, because any vendor that they decide to hire, that's a relationship that they're probably going to keep for a long time. And even if they do end up terminating that relationship with a vendor, they may pop up and do some other creative services. So we constantly have to keep every single little relationship in mind, rather than kind of working on one big deal and then closing the deal and kind of being able to move on to the next one. We're constantly involved.
Let's throw out an open question to the panel, and it's a completely subjective question. What do you personally believe are the best psychological and personality traits for an effective negotiator?
I think it's completely subjective. I think, again, it's what I said before. I think you have to be authentic to who you are. If you're kind of a pussycat and you try to be a bulldog in a negotiation, it's probably not going to go very well. But I think it's, for me, it's a combination of everything that everyone on this panel has said. It's listening more than talking. It's knowing what to hold back, knowing what to go for. I mentioned my Fox negotiation. At a certain point, I was being really honest because I didn't understand what some of the deal points were that were being thrown back at me. And I said, completely authentically, again, I don't understand what you're asking for. Can you explain it to me? And can you explain why this is important to you? And in hearing that explanation, and I wasn't being a smartass, I really wanted to understand it. In the explanation is where I understood where I could give and what the real end game was, and it wasn't how the provision was written. And so for me, what works probably isn't what's going to work for all of you, and you're probably all a lot scarier than I am on a negotiation, but I ask a lot of questions and try to figure out where we can end up.
I think when you're in-house, you almost have to have a split personality. I think talent reps have a tendency to form one personality, and there is the bulldog, or there is the pussycat, or they have one, and so talent gravitates to a representative that has those particular skills or attributes. When you're in-house, you're going to run across all of those people, and so you have to be able to adapt and deal with them. So I think you have to be more of a chameleon in-house. I personally like the people who are straightforward, tell me the truth, and I will reward that more. When you're in-house, you have a pretty good area of discretion. So I think the people that I've built a nice, trusting relationship with, and I know that if they make a mistake, they'll tell me, and we can fix it together. Those are the ones that I respond to. However, I do have to deal with the bulldogs, and I will tell you honestly, if there's one guy in town who you pick up the phone and you say hello, and he begins to scream. That's just what he does. And here's what I do: on the old days, I would put the headset down and wait for it to calm down a little bit, and I'd pick up the phone and I would say, "I don't think I can do that," and I would put it back down. I have no idea what he said. He would scream and scream and scream because that's just what he did, and he got nothing from me until he calmed down. But then he was, and on that my area of discretion, he got the least amount that I could possibly give because I didn't appreciate that negotiation style. So on the in-house, you have to be aware of that, but know that the style you take is going to have an impact on the other side as well.
Does he work for one of IMG's companies?
He works for a very powerful firm in town and still has a lot I still
exactly
I still deal with him all the time.
I think I've dealt with him too. I can't second that enough. There's no need to be a jackass in negotiations. There really isn't. I mean, it does not get you anywhere, and it's one of the things personally, just in terms of, how you negotiate and your psychology around it, it does not get you anywhere, in my opinion. Now, we've had those people on the other end of the call, and I do a similar thing. I just wait and wait. Are you done yet? Okay, so let's get to what needs to be negotiated. And So I think for me, just from a personality standpoint, you are authentic. You don't have to be rude about negotiations, but you do have to be tough because people will run over you. People will try to negotiate terms around you. So you have to be tough. And again, I think that's something you build on. You don't get tough the second year you're out of law school negotiating on a really big deal. But you also, back to listening, you sit in and you hear different negotiation styles of people who you work for or on the other side, and you can pick up for yourself, does that work for me, or does that style not work for her, and learn all those things as you go along. So I said it a little earlier, and it's kind of the way I operate, which is if you have to say no, you can say no with a little sugar or with vinegar. It goes down much better with sugar.
It's interesting hearing them talking about dealing with the more difficult negotiators. It's especially difficult with people who've never, ever worked in-house. I've gone back and forth. I think some of us have gone back and forth between representing the other side and where you are now. And if you're working in-house, you know every single detail of what you can and can't do, and you know every single detail of how your business operates. And that puts you at a big advantage over the person on the other side. And there are ways that I can punish that person and make sure that they don't get anything important. They may get things that on the surface they think are important, or things that they want to fight for because for whatever reason that's what they make the stand on. And I walk away from the deal knowing that I basically punished them for not playing along and being nice, and they never knew that it happened. And that's something we can all do. We all know where our pressure points are, and they don't.
Yeah, I always call it the non-give.
Right, exactly. There's lots of things I can give that don't affect my business at all. Yeah.
But one thing I want to add is we're talking a lot about negotiating with people on the other side and companies on the other side, but as in-house counsel, there's a lot that we do that's negotiating internally as well. Yeah. And often some of the most protracted negotiations are getting internal stakeholders to agree on an approach. And at every company I've worked in, that has been a dynamic. And so also being adept at not taking sides, but helping to drive the internal consensus and deal points is something that a lot of in-house counsel, I spend a lot of my time doing that, trying to make sure that we're articulating and have a consensus on what it is that we're going for.
You need to have certainly a solution-based approach, I think, to everything that everyone said here. It's exactly that. You have to listen, you have to not be a jackass, try to be nice. But to kind of second what Lisa said, I believe that you can be assertive without being autocratic, and you can be conciliatory without completely, bending over and let people just run right over you. You need to make sure you understand the business, and I think that's what really helps in negotiations. The more educated I am on what my client wants, the easier it is for me to negotiate because I know where I can give and where I can't give.
I want to ask the GEMA organizers when they want us to start taking questions. What time do you want us to start taking questions? I could do it now. Well, we have the Twitter account. I have not seen any questions yet. I'm monitoring it, so if you want to ask questions, or if you just want to speak up, now would be a good time to ask. Well, I saw that hand first.
Yeah, what's the question on the Twitter? Maybe I have the wrong handle, but I was wondering, how involved are you in developing new business for all the panels?
I'm not. Usually, that in our organization is our corporate dev biz team. And there are a lot of lawyers in that team. So I think that's the type of role that you could see almost any of us going to, or any lawyer going to, because there's a lot of negotiation, a lot of business strategy. So personally, I'm the one that ends up dealing with some of the transactional and deal work related to the new business, but I don't develop it.
I am closer in that now, but it's because of the position I'm in now as a COO. Part of what I have to do is work with the CEO and the CFO. We develop business strategies as forward. So we're looking to move into digital media and doing podcasts and and webisodes and those kind of things. So we look at that. So that just, I think it's a function as you move into a more of a management kind of level of things, then you're involved in that.
Yeah, I would say I'm pretty heavily involved in the development phase, both with developing television, but also new businesses. And we recently launched an esports league, and that was something that we had been kicking around, but it was a couple of lawyers and I were involved in getting that off the ground. And it's just the role that I have is legal, but because I sit on top of so many businesses and understand what some of the issues are, it's helpful, to have that point of view when new business is being contemplated and structured.
In my role, not really much at all.
I would say that if you get to a certain point in your career where you've been doing this long enough and you work for a company that values the input of people that understand the businesses, it's sort of inevitable that you get to that role. Not every business thinks that way, but if you think about it, we're some of the most educated people in the company, and there's only a couple of departments in a typical company that go across every single business. We're one, finance is one, depends on the way people are structured. But so when you have somebody that's seen the business for 20 years and sits across all the businesses, it makes sense to include them in your development and planning, but not everybody does it. Yes?
It's been fascinating to watch lately a real nostalgia, and this is my question for Rebecca and Chris, around the big movie houses and the production companies on the West Coast, say 60 to 70 years ago, and movies like Hail Caesar come to mind as that example. But now you've got so much big name movies made outside of the US, and at the same time changes in production houses or licensing houses sourcing original content from anywhere. Do you think long term those old movie juggernauts on the West Coast are actually going to change and start bringing more work back, more production back to those houses, or do you think the ship sort of sailed for the Warner Brothers or the Universals of our time? I mean, I understand it could be personal views for you, Chris, because of your role.
Right. I think that we're always looking to see what's available. So for us, and I think most studios, it's all about where the cheapest source of funds are and what people want to see. Are you looking at both things? So Warner Brothers and Universal, they will make movies overseas themselves. And and part of what we do is we look and see where the tax credits are. And if a movie's going to cost me $60 million, if I make it in Los Angeles, I can maybe make it in Canada for $45 million. And so because of those rebates, and so that impacts where your production actually is. I think the studios and any LA-based production company, they're also looking at we live in an international world now that we didn't necessarily think about when I started 25 years ago. We thought every movie we made was how was it going to do here in the States, and then who cares about overseas. Now sometimes we'll make movies because we know they'll do well overseas. And so you'll see some movies that don't do well here, but they're huge in Europe or they're huge in Asia, and those can make just as much money for a studio as as a purely Hollywood romantic comedy can be. So we try to cover as many bases as we can to make as much money as we can at the end of the day.
Yeah, and I would just add, a lot of major studios are investors or part owners in a lot of these indie production companies and also in streaming companies and other things. And I just think it's where you see distribution really being fractured and models kind of being upended with, now Hulu is ordering original content and paying for a series, and what Netflix did 5 years ago was sort of groundbreaking. I just think it's probably not going to be a one-size-fits-all model anytime soon, and I just see more individualization and different kinds of deals coming our way.
One more question.
I am neither a law student nor a lawyer, to my parents' chagrin. But I'm here because I'm a young producer and the marketing director for a show that was picked up by a Hulu subsidiary.
Congratulations.
And I'm very interested in what Claudine said about educating herself on her clients' needs. Now, for the creative types, what can we do to educate ourselves on what you're doing?
Ooh.
Hire a good lawyer.
I love that question. I make it a point, at least in my company and at the firm, to do legal 101 presentations for marketing people. I think it's really, really important for them to be on my team as well as me being on their team, so they know, hey, these are the issues that I'm looking out for. These are the IP concerns that I have. These are the privacy concerns that I have. So they can be kind of the first line of defense, and they can call me quicker and say, hey, does this sound fishy to you? We're doing this. It just reminded me of something you said about Reddit publicity, right? So for me, education on the marketing side is extremely important. If you have the ability to go to sessions like these and to look for, legal CLEs, maybe they'll be boring for you to some degree, but just go to as many educational legal events that you can, because I do think it's really important, at least for you to understand the lingo and kind of know what the issues are.
Are you going to be in LA a lot, or are you based in LA?
I'm based here.
Okay.
My full-time job is I'm a legal assistant in FCC policy work.
Oh.
I'm kind of doing all sorts of things right now.
Well, there won't be any FCC work to do in this administration. So you'll have lots of time. No, seriously, there is one really good program in LA. UCLA Extension has a really good education program for people who want to learn about the business, and they offer certificate programs. But more importantly, a lot of producers and a lot of creative people take the classes because it fills in a substantive gap that you can't, there's nowhere to read, be formally educated about these sorts of things. And they have access to every major industry professional. A lot of people teach classes there. That's how I started teaching, so. More questions, more questions. Somebody's had their hand up for a long time. Well, I don't know, but man. We'll get to everybody. I think we have some time.
I have a question about protecting intellectual property. It's obviously a big part of all of your business. And what is your strategy behind what you're going to protect? And necessarily, Disney's notorious for protecting everything, but with Frozen, they've kind of laxed a little bit and let things show up on YouTube. And do you have a major strategy that you go with to determine what attack?
Well, from my perspective, there's a general rule, and then there are always exceptions. So your general rule is you protect everything all the time because you have to. Because once the dam breaks, the fear is that it'll be gone forever, and we lose. The studios lose tens, if not hundreds of millions of dollars a year from pirated films and everything. And it's a big deal. And those are real jobs that people don't realize that there are hundreds of people that work on a film. And if we've lost that amount of money, that's one less movie a year that you make, and that's 150 people out of work that year. So we do have that's the major rule. But then we'll look if there's something strange. We'll look at it. If we think it has some publicity value, we may have a conversation with them and say, you realize that this is illegal, but we'll give you permission to do it. So it's now not illegal, but you can only do it in this kind of way. So they get what they want, and you get what you need as well. And I think CBS has done that, and Paramount on the Star Trek things for a long time. They've allowed fan fiction and those kind of things until it got too far, and then there was a lawsuit. So you have to be careful, but I think you have to look at it on a case-by-case basis, starting from the point of everything's protected.
I'm interested by all of your touching on distribution, how that's changing, especially in the international arena. So in your experience, do you feel like we're moving more towards a global simul culture, meaning that things go out day and date no matter what the distribution platform is? And instances like an HBO example, Game of Thrones is the world's most popular show and the world's most pirated. So what is happening on your side that you're seeing? Are you trying to keep the rights in different territories to carve out? Is that helpful? Should we be moving towards day and date?
I think also the answer is going to be different depending on
Yeah.
the medium.
Exactly. Yeah.
So you,
But part of my question is, should it? I mean, for a lot of people, it doesn't matter whether you think it's a film or a TV show or Miss America. We're watching it on our phones.
Well, but I think the difference really is how it's being financed and then who has the rights and who's actually owning or part owning the show. So many producers will go to certain networks and have their programming fully funded. And so in exchange for that first run in that territory is going to be protected by anybody who's paying for the production. And at least you probably can speak with much more sophistication about this. I will just say that for a lot of the deals that I'm involved in where we're financing and we're involved in international sales, different territories really do have different values depending on what they are, and the pricing can be very, very parsed. And I don't think we're going to a all territory simulcast unless a producer is cash flowing that production on its own and figuring out, ways to get the distribution. But I mean, I spend half of my day dealing with windowing and carving out electronic sell-through and other modes, and I don't see that stopping anytime soon.
I would agree, and I think at least on the film side, you're not just you're trying to get people out of the house too, because they're trying to get into the theaters, and so you have to look at the cultures of each country and their holiday schedules and when movies. Some people go to the movies in the summer, and here Christmas holidays are great. In some countries, that's not at all, and so you couldn't have a big family release here go out in a bunch of countries overseas because no one's going to, no one will be in the theater. So I think each country and each territory has their own, they have a unique perspective on what they can do, and so I think it's good to listen to those experts in each of those territories. You also have on distribution side, you've got different constituents. You've got theater owners that we have to worry about. So we can't just go, theaters and TV at the same time, because the theater owners are not going to put the movie in the theaters then. So because they're not making any money. So you have to balance your distribution stream owners as well in making all of those decisions. It's collapsing a little bit, and so there's some pressure. But I think end of the day, a movie, especially the big movies, are big movies and events because people see them at the same time in a big theater. And I think those then still drive, in my business, DVD sales and VOD sales and the television sales and how much money we make from Showtime and HBO when it airs. It's based on how big the theatrical is, and if that goes away, I think it'll dramatically change the kind of movies that you see. I don't think you'll have the big ones anymore. So I think people still like those, and so I think you'll always have that at some level.
We have time for one more quick question. We don't want to keep Daryl from getting his award, so.
I guess this panel is definitely was against the FCC set-top proposal. But one of the questions that's been asked is, are there any circumstances under which networks would think that a certain sort of integrated kind of search model would work, or are we still in a world where we pretty much need to have those rights protected in an app? And nobody knows what I'm talking about.
No, we know. I think that's a very complicated and long discussion, and I think it depends on what point of view you come at. I don't think we all necessarily were against that. But I don't want to avoid the question, but I don't know if we have time to go into that. That's a pretty big piece, big chunk to chew right there. So thank you, everybody, for coming. Thank our panelists, and see you next.
You can leave there. Thank you all so much. I know many of us in this room could listen to this panel for a lot longer, but we ask everybody to just stay in the auditorium because we are going to present our Alumni Achievement Award to a very deserving alum, Daryl Miller. And then right after the presentation, we'll be offering lunch just right outside the auditorium on the upper level. So we are thrilled to present this year's Alumni Achievement Award to Daryl Miller, the chair of the entertainment department at Fox Rothschild and the managing partner of the Los Angeles office. He has more than 2 decades of entertainment law deal-making experience, and his clients range from A-list actresses to music moguls to reality TV superstars.
Mr. Miller has received many accolades, including recognition in Variety's prestigious Dealmakers Impact Report and in The Hollywood Reporter's The Top 100 Power Lawyers. In 2016 alone, he was deemed one of the most influential lawyers by the Los Angeles Business Journal and the 2016 Entertainment Lawyer of the Year by the Beverly Hills Bar Association. Truly, the list of honors goes on and on.
He is also an accomplished author. His first book, titled The 16th Minute of Fame, An Insider's Guide for Maintaining Success Beyond 15 Minutes of Fame, was nominated for an NAACP Image Award.
We are proud to present the GEMA Law Alumni Achievement Award to him. We couldn't think of anyone more deserving, and we invite Daryl to come up.
Thank you very much. tramo la stelle, alba al vincerò, vincerò, vincerò. Thank you, Georgetown Metropolitan Opera. It is absolutely wonderful. Wonderful to be here and accept this award. Cut! That's kind of how I felt throughout my years here at Georgetown. The day I walked into law school here. On a more serious note, it is absolutely an honor to be here today and to receive the award. And I had to still remember that I could sing because the last time I was here and I was talking to my buddy Chris Floyd, we were in the Gilbert and Sullivan Society. And if any of you ever saw any of the plays, it wasn't until my second year. I was too scared to actually do anything my first year. But in the second and third year, I think we did everything from Rudder Gore to HMS Pinafore to Bye Bye Birdie, all of it right here on this stage. So I went out and I had to do a couple little warm-ups and practice and says, let me see if I can still hit that high B like Luciano Pavarotti in Nessun Dorma. I want to say thank you to the GEMA Law and the organizers of this event, and to, in particular, to Anik and Marissa and my good friend Rachel. Where is Rachel Braun, who I know works really hard. There she is back there. Thank you. I know you had a little bit to do with this and going, Daryl, thank you so much. It is really great to be back, and it's really great to receive this award. I was asked to tell you a little bit kind of about my journey. I'm a deal maker, just like on this panel, and I do that every day. I've been in private practice for my entire career since I left Georgetown in 1990. And so I thought I'd share with you very briefly kind of the 4 secrets of my success as I see them, and give you a little insight into my crazy world, because I'm the last thing that you could predict, and that's the way I like it, and actually that's the way I live. The first secret is I feel that I have been incredibly blessed. I'm from Cincinnati, Ohio, a typical blue-collar neighborhood. 98% of my family is still in a 3-mile radius, live and die right there, and I am by no means the smartest of the bunch. But I absolutely am the first, or one of the first, to actually just get away and leave, and got out, and I got out through music. Many of you who know my real core background, I studied at a high school performing arts. I went to a college conservatory of music and studied classical voice and musical theater, and a history and minor. And then I went on and traveled around the United States performing, and did 28 shows with the Pittsburgh Civic Light Opera, and went on to do 2 international tours around the world, and the last tours where my life really changed. The first tour I did was in Russia, and Poland and Leningrad, and we did a bunch of American musicals, and we performed only for the young communist parties. We were not allowed to perform publicly, but there were special meetings of young communist organizations that came together in Russia at the time. And we were the entertainers, and then we got to kind of connect and learn about communism and learn about their culture as they learned about ours. The second tour I did was put on by the State Department and the Minnesota Opera Company, and they wanted to find an American musical, and for the first time in the history of America, take a full-blown American musical abroad as an exchange gift to many different countries to basically improve the relations between our countries through the arts. And they searched and searched and searched all the American musical theater repertoire, could not basically find anything that didn't offend a lot of the cultures abroad. And then they ultimately settled on, you would not believe this, Once Upon a Mattress. If any of us know the story of The Princess and the Pea. And so I auditioned and got a role and played a part in the first full-blown American musical. We took sets, costumes, lights, and everything, and 44 boxes of equipment through customs, opening in Bombay, India, now Mumbai, and played all throughout India, Madras, Calcutta, New Delhi, went to Sri Lanka, up into the hills of Kandy, then on to Egypt and throughout Europe, and it was really a whirlwind, life-changing, amazing tour. And so it literally was one day me standing at about 5 in the morning on the shore of the Chowpatty Beach in Mumbai, then Bombay, literally thinking, oh my God, how blessed and how amazing it is that I have come this far, and what can I do to ensure my chances of continuing experiences like this. I was so smart enough to understand that singing was a gift, and I felt like I had it. I could do it in my sleep, and I'd already got my blessing with singing. But the real challenge for me was, what can I do? What can I find? What can I add to my singing that would actually make me a stronger player and a more predictable person who could find successful things and put those in motion, as opposed to waiting for the call sheet to go up and have an audition. And so a blue-collar kid from Ohio had no clue what to do, and so I fell back on society, and every society person tells you to become a doctor or a lawyer. So I researched how to be a doctor, because I said that's number one. And but for the blood and all of the years of training, I would have gone to med school. And so I scratched being a doctor and went on and said, lawyer. Let me check out being a lawyer, because there was no lawyers in my family. I can fortunately say I didn't even know no criminal lawyers, because I was a good little kid who worked really hard. But I just, what is a lawyer? How to become a lawyer? And so I researched the lawyers and found two observations. One, 3 years versus 12 in residency. And then I really did look at the entertainment business and looked at kind of the role of the lawyer in society, and then in entertainment in particular. And they were studio heads, they were general counsels, they were, in agencies, they were deal makers, they were a lot of times creating the architect of many of the first impression deals or the more significant things that were happening in the business. And the lights went on in my head. And I said, let me try to be a lawyer, because at the end of the day, if it doesn't work out, at least I know I can sing and dance. So I secretly came back to New York and drove down to New Haven and took the Stanley Kaplan LSAT course. And while I was on a production of Carnival that was destined for Broadway, I was up at the Goodspeed Opera House performing and going and ready to go to Broadway. And Goodspeed Opera House is still the oldest wooden opera house in America. Shows like Man of La Mancha, Annie, and a number of shows started there. And we were doing a revival of Carnival. So I wouldn't tell a soul, because they thought I was all out of my mind. In the eyes of my family, and my friends, I was the most successful thing in the world, because I had stories from around the world. I was making money. I was traveling. I was singing. How could I not be happy? So I didn't tell a single person, and I did it all privately and quietly. So the end of the production comes. I take the LSAT course. I go back to New York City, and I wait for the Broadway show to be picked up. And I apply to 12 schools, thinking all of them would think I'm crazy, but a couple would have to take me. I picked my big list and my middle list and my home list, the University of Cincinnati, downtown neighborhood, the one that had to take me, And I actually got into 9 of the 12 schools that I applied to. And Georgetown wasn't one of them. I have to admit, I love Georgetown. I'm happy to have gone here. But on that top tier, I looked at that beautiful application, that embossing, and I just said, that is too expensive. I went on for Harvard and others, At the end of the day, Georgetown invited me back based on my grades and based on everything, and just came and said, would you please come and apply? We'd like to consider you to coming in for the class of 1987. And I ultimately did it. Applied and got into Georgetown, and the dream began. I was absolutely more terrified than anyone could imagine. When I finally got in, and I think it was my 3rd year, half of my buddies still thought I was in New York City somewhere on Broadway or traveling around the world. Half the people in law school kind of went, what's going on? By that time, Chris knew my secret, because I started singing and we were having a great time, and we were really just creating an enormous bond that continues to this day. I think I've been here twice now where they've done revivals, and I've come back and tried to learn a tune and sing. But at any rate, I've never stopped feeling blessed, and I've never stopped working, which is my second point, incredibly hard. I really have always had to work incredibly hard, and I had at this point embraced hard work. My real question is, where am I going to apply that hard work? And for me in the arts, it had to be in the arts, and I did what I felt was amazing, and I achieved amazing things. At Georgetown, Lord knows I had to work very, very hard, because anybody who knew my entire background was anything but the study of law, and I didn't go home to a bunch of academics. I basically had to apply myself, and so I worked like Rocky Balboa to get through Georgetown and then ultimately the California bar. But most importantly, what I really want to leave you with are kind of the points 3 and 4, which I think are the keys to my success. And I kind of look at them together because they are themes that I live with every day. And they're things that drive me now, they drove me at Georgetown, and they drove me out at the time I left Cincinnati and decided to be someone who is going to break out of the norm within my family. And those themes are, number 3 is thinking differently. Thinking differently. And number 4 is embracing change. Thinking differently and embracing change is something that I just live with second nature at this point, and something that used to be a luxury, right? Because it always was do what you did, do what everyone else did, and you were going to get in as long as you had the credentials. But today I find in Hollywood succeeding in a business that's changing more significantly than anyone could imagine. And Lord knows, Chris, when we arrived in 1990, when we were dominated by 3 broadcast networks, 1 movie screen with the hope of a second feature, and basically records that we still had to buy a compilation of 12 to 14 hits for that 1 single that we really, really wanted in our collection. The business has completely changed on its head. And but for thinking differently and embracing change, I do not think, and I'm pretty positive I would not be here today. I was not welcome to Hollywood, contrary to what many might believe based on the awards and the things that I get today. I was another typical person, in this case, an African-American young man who wanted to get into business that was not filled with a lot of African-American men or women in the business. I was an outsider from Ohio who schooled in D.C. and lived in New York, who was among a number of insiders, many of whom had not come from Ohio, D.C., or New York. I was ultimately a person, when I went to California, I studied litigation. I got in where I could fit in, right? In the 1990, when we came out, we were at a big depression. Remember 87, Milken and Boesky, and the markets crashed, and everything was horrible, and it was really, really bad. By the time we came out, they were whining about how terrible it is that Georgetown only had 85% placement that year, where we had pretty much had 95% every year before that. But it was really, really tough at that time. So I took a job as a litigator with a Chicago firm. And I was a civil business litigator like Chris when I first got out, because that's ultimately what I can do. But that firm had an LA office. And that LA office was a tiny little office, and lights went on again, thinking differently and embracing change. I basically asked, could I go to the LA office and just be a young associate there doing litigation? And maybe someday, if I'm good enough, smart enough, work hard enough, and get a few more blessings, I might be able to help the firm kind of get into this little thing called entertainment. Why? Because I come from entertainment. You know, I never did it as a legal person or a business person, but it doesn't take a rocket science to realize that some of the great people like Luke Perry, who was discovered in Beverly Hills 90210, or Rocky Carroll, who was nominated on Broadway for The Piano Lesson, or Sarah Jessica Parker, who came from my high school, all who kind of went on to California to do great things. And it wasn't rocket science that I might be able to be in the room, hang out, and be at one of those parties that Chris hangs at, and somebody might give me a job. So I literally got to California, I often say through the back door, at the satellite office of a firm called Lord Bissell and Brooke, which is now, I think, Lord Lockheed. And I practiced litigation, and I learned, and I wanted to be a great lawyer initially as a foundation. And I worked really hard. I had trials. Now, here's my secret then. Most really, really, really talented people in the firm, I remember, couldn't say their name standing on their feet. Well, I could say my name, I could sing a song, I could do everything standing on my feet. And so ultimately, it was the preparation that I had to put together. And I had no problem with that, putting the time in. And I had a great, wonderful few years as a litigator. But it wasn't my calling. I knew it wasn't my calling. It was something that I did to build a skill set, but it was not something that I did with the passion. And ultimately, the door opened when Rupert Murdoch launched the 4th broadcast network. After many, many, many failed attempts, he ultimately launched the 4th broadcast network on a simple theory: find a tiny niche audience that can be loyal to me, allow me to get a base, and then grow the audience from there. What was that tiny audience that allowed him to get a base in late 80s and ultimately early 90s? It was the African-American audience. The African-American audience, if you remember, at the early days of Fox, was Fox. From Living Single, The Martin Lawrence Show, In Living Color, Had America Laughing. All of those opportunities started opening a couple of doors to friends who were close to me, and gave me a couple of producer deals, writer deals, director deals, and I just kind of did those deals. But then there was a young man named Mike DeLuca, who ran New Line Cinema, which is a small label, a feature label over on the Warner side. And he had a great idea of not just doing, at that point, I think it was $50 or $60 million average studio films. So they're $100 million average studio films. But he said, let me try to make tiny, small films for $2 or $3 million and see how much return I could make. And he started that process and making a number of tiny films returning 30, 40, 30, 40, a lot, millions of dollars. And that's a bigger return than investing $100 million and only making a couple of $100 million. And a lot of those early films were, again, African-American themed, films like Friday and Dead Presidents and others. And I got in with just some friends that I knew. And then you get in, your skill set, and you start making relationships, you start networking, and before you know it, I was generating, as a third-year lawyer, more money for the firm than the salary they were paying me. And then I never looked back. I never looked back. And my other way in, I had a simple theory. If I worked really hard for a key set of clients, they would want me in their lives as long as they were successful and beyond. And I really started out, and that was my mission. And so I thought that I didn't have to be partner, I didn't have to be in charge of the firm, I didn't have to be embraced by Hollywood. I really thought that I just simply had to have clients that entrusted me with their affairs, that trusted me as an advisor, that allowed me to do the deals, and would stand behind me if I was that tough negotiator on their behalf to make sure their career moved in a positive direction. And that's what I did. The other embracing change came when, as we know, we arrived in the business in the early days of digital technology, CompuServe, Prodigy, AOL, 28.8 a modem, things going slow. I jumped on that stuff like it's going to be the future. And I ultimately believe the future, the information superhighway, if any of us remember, we were all talking about that back then. If that ever came to be, there would be a lot more opportunity for a lot of people, including myself, if I was in the right place at the right time with the right skill set. And that's literally what I've done for the last 26 years. I went out in California, not a single family member, not a friend, other than those with whom I had connected in the entertainment business. And in 26 years, I'm so honored and proud that I have built a great business. I practiced litigation. I went to a boutique firm in entertainment. I launched my own firm, and for 15 years had my own firm called Miller & Plykus. We were making a great amount of noise and doing a number of things for artists. And in 2009, I went into this large firm that I'm currently at called Fox Rothschild, based in Philadelphia. And they asked me to basically launch an entertainment department. And I launched it by myself with one assistant in 2009. And very proud to tell you today, just January 9th, we announced 6 more lawyers came in, but we're up to 23 lawyers in 4 offices around the country. I'm sitting on the executive committee of the firm that makes all decisions from salary to lateral partners. I'm an office managing partner of Los Angeles, and I run and chair the entertainment department. So I continue to live through my secrets by being blessed. I continue to know, if anybody knows the inner workings of law firms, to work very, 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 very hard. And I would not, again, think for a day to go without thinking differently, embracing change in the business that we operate, because it is different. We're no longer film, TV, and records. How many? Raise your hand if you bought a record or a CD or an 8-track or a cassette in the last year. Raise your hand if you've raced home on a Tuesday night or any night of the week at a prime time or a specific time to catch your show. Remember back in the day, Dallas and Knots Landing, and you had to see it. Raise your hand if you've actually gone to a movie theater and only had one screen and you didn't have 30 choices to figure out what to pick from. And raise your hand if you've never touched social media and all that influence and stuff we were talking about today, been driven by Instagrams and Facebooks and things of that nature. And then raise your hand if you don't know where all the kids have gone who used to be at home watching Flintstones at 3:30, now basically all gathered around social media experiences and all of their interactive experience through that little video game console that basically drives more kids than any other vehicle, and where kids are generating $1 billion on opening day for video games. My business has changed. For those who have not embraced that change, it is a hell of a business, because entertainment used to be insulated from bad times, right? And it was bad times, you watch free TV, go to a cheap movie, and you buy a record and you sing about good things. In good times, you do more of it. At the end of the day, this is the first paradigm shift in society that has affected profoundly the industry in which I work. This is the first paradigm shift where the distributors, the studios, the networks, and the creators of the content can no longer tell the consumer what you better do when you better do it. The consumers are now telling us when we're going to do it, how we're going to do it, where we're going to do it, and for how much we will do it. And that has flipped the entire business on its head. And I have really just tried to understand it, embrace it, find talent, be next to talent, be next to institutional brands. We represent brands all across. It's really about, for me, the leveraging of a brand across many platforms and generating revenue streams, plural. The 16th Minute of Fame, the book that I wrote, really was that concept. It was like, if you're going to be famous, as Andy Warhol says, forget that. Focus on the 16th minute and beyond. And how do you do that? You can't just go to school and get a job. You just can't do one thing anymore. You have to do a variety of things to have a multiple streams of revenue in order to live the kind of life you could live the day I arrived in California. So that's what I do. That's been my little secret. I now have an army of clients who know that I will fight like a pit bull, but I'm a nice pit bull, right? For those guys, they go, yeah, he's a sweetheart, but he's tough in the negotiation. I really have never thought I had the luxury of being angry or mad, because I was more blessed the day I arrived in California than I ever thought I would be. So I have a good time. I enjoy what I do. I work very tenaciously. And I, again, thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for being here. All my friends who came out, I thought it would be like students who would never know me. Jeffrey showed up. Everybody's like here. So thank you so much for having me, and thank you for giving me this award. And anytime you call, I'm here because I love being a Hoya. Thank you.
And please join us for lunch, again, right outside the auditorium on the upper level.